Hey guys! Tonight we sail straight into the mouldy heart of maritime misery. You're standing on the splintered deck of a creaking 18th century vessel, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. The stars are blinking weakly overhead, the salt air stings your eyes, and the only thing louder than the waves is your stomach. The cook finally hands you your evening ration. It's not stew, it's not fish, it's a biscuit. A thick, beige brick, dry as sand, hard as coral, older than some of the crew. You snap it in half, well, you try to snap it in half, and a tiny white worm wiggles free. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lift the biscuit closer to your nose. That was a mistake. It smells faintly of old paper, wet rope, and... is that ammonia? You know it's not fresh, but it's technically edible. That's the problem. It's always technically edible. Hardtack, they call it. A name that feels like a warning and a dare. It's flour, water, and nothing else. No salt, no butter, no joy. Just baked until it's so dry that fungi give up. And then if you're lucky, it's stored in canvas sacks for a few months before making its way to you. If you're not lucky, those sacks have been sitting in a damp storeroom for 2 years. Or more. You bite down. You really shouldn't have. The biscuit doesn't break so much as resist. You feel it fight your molars like it's trying to return to the quarry from which it was surely mined. Somewhere in the middle of chewing, or trying to, your tongue brushes against something soft. And moving. Yep, weevils. Again, these are not metaphorical weevils. They are real. They are squirming. And worse, they're dead. Mostly. You think. Sailors in the 1700s had a phrase for it. Meat biscuits. Not because they were served with meat, no, because the insects inside had more protein than the biscuit itself. Historians still argue whether captains truly believed the bugs were harmless protein or if they just stopped caring. Some evidence suggests that officers quietly scraped out their rations while the crew pretended not to notice. Others say everyone ate around the bugs. One man reportedly used the butt of his musket to shatter his biscuit into pieces before soaking it in grog. Partly to soften it, mostly to drown the bugs. There were tricks, of course. Some held their biscuit over a lantern to coax the weevils out. Others would tap it gently over a plate, like seasoning a stew with protein dust. Still others didn't bother. They just closed their eyes and chewed quickly. You were always told, don't look too close. Don't sniff too long, and never ask what that soft crunch was. By now your jaw aches from the effort. Hardtack isn't food, it's a test of dental resolve. Lost fillings, cracked molars, and even full-on tooth loss were not uncommon. Some sailors carried knives just to shave off layers of the biscuit like carving driftwood. Others used their fists. One dramatic account describes a man who struck his biscuit against the mast and broke it in half, along with his wrist. And yet, bizarrely, biscuits were considered reliable. You could stack them, you could store them. They didn't rot, that is, unless you count the bugs. In fact, the bugs were part of the deal, an expected surprise, like bonus content. Sailors joked that the biscuits were alive when you got them and still twitching when you ate them. One ship's log even records a contest. Whoever found the most bugs in one biscuit got an extra ration of rum. The record was 43. That's not a biscuit, that's an ecosystem. And yes, the biscuits had names. The Navy called them ship's biscuits, or sea biscuits. The men had more colourful terms, cannonball loaves, molar grinders, jawbreakers of the damned. One cheeky crew referred to them as HMS breadcrumb, a nod to how little of them actually crumbled. What's even funnier, or sadder, depending on how tired you are, is that these biscuits were supposed to be a step forward. In the centuries before hardtack, sailors relied on whatever they could find. Dried peas, salted roots, spoiled cheese. Biscuit was a modern solution. Durable, efficient, lifeless. They baked them 4 times over, like they were trying to remove any trace of actual food. Of course, when food lacks all moisture, it gains something else, a personality. Sailors told stories of biscuits with haunted crumbs. One tale goes that if you bit into a biscuit and it cracked cleanly, it was a good omen. If it crumbled into dust, someone was going to die. Superstitious, maybe. But when you're weeks at sea, sunburned, half-starved, and surrounded by creaking tying timber and whispering waves, even a biscuit starts to seem ominous. You settle back against the hull, your jaw sore, your stomach slightly queasy. Another bite? No, thank you. You slip the rest of the biscuit into your pocket. Maybe it'll scare off the rats later. And so the biscuit waits, solid, stoic, slightly twitching. Tomorrow maybe you'll try soaking it in tea. Assuming the tea isn't mouldy or alive, you roll over in your hammock, groaning softly as your stomach stages a polite but firm protest. The biscuit is still in your pocket. A little flatter now, possibly cracked, but otherwise indestructible. It's like a stone of memory, a souvenir from dinner. You wonder vaguely if it's still wriggling. Outside, the ship groans with each wave, her timbers bending like a tired old man's spine. Somewhere near the stern, someone retches over the side. A few hammocks away, a voice mutters a prayer that sounds more like a bribe. And you, well, you're just thinking about salt beef. It's not exactly beef the way you'd hope. No grill marks, no seasoning, no rich scent curling into the night. No, salt beef is a slab of meat that's been boiled, brined, reboiled, and then left to soak in its own strange briny bath for months. Imagine a leather boot dunked in seawater, left on a warm rock for a few weeks, then served lukewarm with a side of dread. That's salt beef. You once saw the cook fish a chunk out of a barrel. He reached in, elbow deep, and yanked out something grey, glistening and vaguely rectangular. It flopped like a wet towel. He sniffed it, shrugged, and threw it in the pot. Steam rose, no one cheered. The smell hits before the food does, a hot, fatty fog of old meat and salt that clings to everything, your clothes, your skin, your dreams. You can't escape it. You eat it fast, not because it's good, but because if you wait too long, your brain starts asking questions. What was that vein? Why did it twitch? Was it beef at all? Historians still argue whether some of that salt beef actually came from horses or even donkeys, depending on where the supplier cut corners. One preserved sample in a naval archive revealed bone fragments from an animal that had clearly never mooed. Another theory suggests that desperate quartermasters sometimes sourced meat from condemned animals, anything that could technically be called protein, and soaked long enough to remove the smell of its previous life. But the brine wasn't just salty, it was alive. The barrels weren't sealed tightly enough to keep time or temperature at bay. Mold formed, slime developed, and worse, things floated. You'd see white tendrils waving like underwater ghosts. One barrel reportedly birthed a tiny colony of seaweed, another an eel. The men called that one Poseidon's pantry. Still, you ate it. You had to. Even when the beef came out smelling like old socks and crumbled when touched, it was better than hunger. At least most of the time. One sailor on record claimed he tapped a piece of beef against the deck and it shattered like glass. He was delighted. It meant he could skip the chewing. Sometimes the meat wasn't rotten. It was simply suspicious. Smooth in all the wrong places, gelatinous but dry. A contradiction on a plate. The cook, always cheerful and slightly terrifying, would call it a lucky piece. You didn't ask what that meant. When your ship docked at certain ports, rumours would float around about meat, stolen from the sick pens. Lung beef, they called it. A few sailors swore they saw teeth in their stew. A joke, you hoped? Probably. And yet, somehow, even the worst meals became part of the routine. One man would always pretend to name his beef chunk. Another held his nose and shouted, "God save the cow," before biting. You had your own ritual, 3 deep breaths, 1 hard swallow, and no eye contact with the plate. The strange part? Salt beef made people nostalgic. They hated it in the moment, but later, when the food ran out entirely, they'd whisper about it like a lost love. "Remember when the beef still had flavour?" one man said during a storm. even if it was mostly mold. There were rules, of course. If the meat smelled sweet, you tossed it. That meant decay had moved beyond the point of negotiation. If it fizzed in the barrel, you ran. One logbook notes, ration ejected a froth upon inspection. Barrel sealed and jettisoned. Crew mourned rum lost in the same wave. Sometimes, the officers had better cuts, but not always. The stink of bad beef doesn't respect rank. A tale survives about an admiral who bit into a slab, turned pale, and simply threw it overboard mid-speech. His men cheered like they'd just survived a battle. And battles did break out over food, over rumors of a fresh barrel, over the idea that someone might be hoarding biscuits free of bugs. The beef barrels in particular were like treasure chests. When a new one was opened, everyone leaned in. Some prayed, others gagged. You just hoped for something chewy instead of jelly-like. You look down now at your stomach, which is quiet, but not content. It's the kind of quiet you get before mutiny. You roll onto your side, trying to forget the smell. But salt beef never really leaves. It lingers in your throat, in your nose, in your nightmares. And so you close your eyes and think of fruit or bread, or a hot meal not served in a storm, not covered in salt, not secretly staring back at you. But the only thing waiting for you tomorrow is another hard biscuit, and probably another slab of meat that jiggles in a way meat shouldn't. Sleep well. Your dreams are short and jagged, more like flickers than stories. A weevil with a tricorn hat tips its brim and dives into a barrel of beef. You wake with a snort, tangled in hammock ropes and wrapped in the smell of damp canvas and bruised salt. You sit up slowly, bones creaking like the rigging above, and reach for your mug. It's not water inside, of course not. It's beer, warm, flat, slightly sour. But to your foggy brain, it's practically nectar. See, drinking water on an 18th century ship is an act of wild optimism. By the time casks of water had been sloshed across oceans, shifted in storms and stored in barely sealed barrels, what came out wasn't exactly refreshing. In fact, it often crawled out by itself. You remember the first time you cracked open a water barrel? The smell, like old cabbage and pond mud, rose like a living thing. The liquid inside had turned the colour of weak tea, with occasional blobs drifting around like lazy jellyfish. One sailor called it swamp broth. Another swore the water winked at him. Historians still argue whether naval officers genuinely believed water could be safely stored for long periods, or whether they simply lied through their wooden teeth. The truth was that water was necessary but not trustworthy. Some ships tried to purify it with vinegar, but that just turned the barrel into a pickled nightmare. Others spiked it with lemon juice if they had any left. Most just gave up and drank the beer. Yes, beer. Low alcohol, thick, often sour, and absolutely everywhere. It was considered safer than water, not because it was clean, but because the alcohol killed off some of the microbial party happening inside. You'd drink it for breakfast, for lunch, for pre-fistfight hydration. A gallon a day, more or less, was the official ration. Sometimes more if your captain was generous or distracted. And when the beer ran out, then it got weird. There was small beer, which was like beer's scrawny cousin. Watery, low in alcohol, and deeply disappointing. There was wine, if you were on a French ship and feeling fancy, and there was rum, of course, but rum was a double-edged sword, delightful in the moment, dangerous an hour later. It turned calm men into poets or pugilists, sometimes both before sunrise. But let's get back to the beer. The problem wasn't just the taste, it was the fermentation. Ships rocked, temperatures rose, barrels swelled. Sometimes, just sometimes, the beer exploded. Not all at once, mind you. Just one barrel, a loud pop, a geyser of foam, a startled shriek from the man below decks now soaked in lukewarm hop soup. One account tells of a ship losing half its beer supply to a chain reaction leak. The staves burst in the heat and pressure, sending beer flooding through the hold like a biblical ale wave. The crew wept. One man tried to save it by scooping it into his hat. Others weren't so lucky. Spoiled beer could make you ill, or worse. There's a grim tale from a Dutch ship where a misidentified cask turned out to be fish oil. No one noticed until after they drank it. Several sailors developed what the journal called feverish hallucinations and terrible dreams of drowning. which you know is just how one hopes to spend a voyage. Still, morning after morning, you reach for the mug. Your lips know not to expect anything cold. The liquid is room temperature. If the room was a sweaty wooden coffin, it tastes like bark and yeast and faint regret. But it goes down. It always goes down because the alternative is worse. You remember the day the water ran completely out? Nothing left but one barrel with a sludgy film on top. The crew drew straws. You didn't lose. But watching the man who did try to chew his way through a swallow of it was enough. He didn't speak for a day, just stared at the waves, hugging his knees like a man betrayed by his own tongue. There was no boiling, no distilling, not on most ships. Fire was a hazard, space was limited, so was common sense. Some tried to catch rain, stretching out tarps and licking the droplets like thirsty moths. Others just gave up and turned to the rum, hoping to black out until the next port. And even when you got to port, fresh water wasn't guaranteed. Some wells were fouled, others were brackish. And then there were the jugs sold by enterprising locals, clear at first, until you realized the bottle was just foggy. One time you found a small frog swimming at the bottom. You called it Jerry and refused to drink from anything else for a week. Of course, sailors weren't alone in their suffering. Officers got the same beer, more or less. Occasionally they'd water it down or mix it with citrus if they had it, making something that tasted like disappointment but looked like effort. Admirals were rumoured to carry their own barrels, secret stashes of port wine or brandy hidden beneath floorboards. If true, none of them ever shared. You glance around the deck now. A few sailors have lined up for their ration, mugs clanking lazily. No one smiles. No one expects refreshment. They just want the familiar warmth, the dull buzz, the sense that today's misery will be slightly blurred. You take another sip. Warm bread yeast and sweat, a hint of iron. Possibly your own tongue, but at least it's not the water. Not today. The sun rises, a pale smear in the sky, more accusation than comfort. It glares down through the rigging like it knows what you did last night, which, to be fair, wasn't much, just chewing on despair and sipping fermented sorrow. You yawn, stretch, and listen as the first orders of the day echo down the deck. And then your gums throb. That's never a good sign. You press your tongue to your teeth, wincing slightly. The front ones still feel loose, the molars tender, aching, and your breath, well, it could probably peel paint off a dinghy. Welcome to scurvy, the sailor's silent companion. Creeping, brutal, and strangely, entirely preventable. If only someone had thought to pack oranges. It starts, innocently, bleeding gums, a sore limb or two. Then your teeth start falling out like autumn leaves. Your breath smells like something crawled into your mouth and gave up. And eventually, your skin bruises from breezes. You remember the first case you saw on board, a wiry man named Finch. One day he was swabbing the deck and humming something off-key. A week later, he couldn't stand without help. His legs looked like overripe plums, dark patches everywhere. His gums bled constantly and he drooled when he talked, which honestly was better than when he tried to chew. Historians still argue whether navies truly understood what caused scurvy, or if they just got lucky with citrus. The Royal Navy eventually figured out that lemon juice helped, then switched to limes, which didn't work quite as well. Hence the nickname limey for British sailors. Ironically, the change may have actually worsened the problem, but the word stuck, even if the sailors didn't. Finch was lucky. We got to port in time for him to eat something green, fresh fruit, fresh air, and he was wobbling around again within a few weeks. But others weren't so lucky. You've seen a man's leg turn black before it even hit the surgeon's saw. You've heard the soft, horrifying clink of teeth hitting wood after a cough. The body just gives up. It stops repairing itself. Wounds reopen. Old bruises reappear like ghosts. Even your thoughts turn sluggish like your brain is operating underwater. There's no escape, not with salted meat, mouldy biscuit and sour beer as your only sustenance. Of course, some tried to fix it themselves. One sailor collected moss off the side of the ship and brewed it into a tea, Another swore by soaking his biscuit in seawater. "Extra minerals," he said. A third started chewing on leather. "Better than the beef," he mumbled with a grin, his gums bleeding bright red. Every now and then a surgeon came aboard with hopeful remedies, vinegar, tinctures, something called portable soup, which was really just rendered fat with salt and despair. Some of these helped, barely. Others made things worse. There was one mix involving powdered sheep's brain that gave everyone hallucinations and the uncontrollable urge to sing sea shanties about barnacles. The worst part? You couldn't see it coming. One day, you're climbing rigging like a monkey. The next, you can't climb out of your hammock. Your skin peels, your joints lock, and your teeth, if you still have any, throb with the rhythm of the ship. And yet, despite everything, the fear of not eating outweighed the fear of scurvy. You needed the biscuit, you needed the salt beef, because there was always the chance, however small, that you wouldn't get anything tomorrow. And so you chewed, you swallowed, you ignored the pain. There were whispers about citrus cargo in the captain's quarters. Tiny bottles of lemon extract. Maybe even a crate of oranges. You once saw a midshipman walking oddly, trying to hide a bright orange peel he'd tucked into his pocket like a treasure map. The smell alone made half the deck follow him like rats after the piper. And then there were the ports. Oh, the ports. Those magical moments when you stepped onto land and tasted real food again. A bite of fresh mango, an onion that didn't crunch like stone, a soft pear that didn't fight back. You remember a banana you ate once in Barbados. You don't remember the dock, or the sky, or the ship you came in on. But you remember that banana, the way it melted, the way it tasted like forgiveness. You cried. Of course, the joy didn't last. Once the ship sailed, you were back to biscuit and beef. The fruit ran out, the vitamins vanished, and your gums started aching again by the second week. You reach up now and gently press on your top teeth. They feel wobbly, not good. You swish some beer in your mouth, not because it'll help, but because, for a second, it feels like it might. It stings, then numbs, then stings again. There's a joke going around the crew lately. What's red, white, and spreads like a rumour? Your gums! It's not a good joke, but everyone laughs anyway, because the alternative is chewing in silence, counting your teeth like sailors count stars. So tonight, you'll eat slowly. You'll close your eyes when the biscuit cracks. You'll chew with your molars and pray they hold. And maybe, just maybe, you'll dream of oranges. You lean against the railing after dusk, watching the sky melt from bruised purple to black, when a crewman sidles up beside you and squints out at the sea like it owes him money. His name's Weller. He's missing 2 fingers, 1 eye, and possibly several important screws. He grunts once, then says the line that's been making the rounds lately. Drank the sea once, didn't care for it. You nod like that makes perfect sense, because on some level, it does. It's not just a joke. It's a bitter little truth. When things got desperate, and they often did, sailors really did try to drink sea water. Not because they thought it was a good idea, but because their bodies stopped asking nicely and started demanding anything. The thing about seawater, of course, is that it's saltier than your blood. Your kidneys can't process it properly. Instead of quenching your thirst, it actually makes you more dehydrated. Your mouth dries out, your tongue swells, your thoughts scatter. Drink enough, and you start seeing things. Voices whisper, shadows move. The sea begins to speak in riddles. You remember your first taste, accidental during a storm, a full mouthful straight from a crashing wave. It burned your throat and left a film on your teeth like licking sandpaper dipped in vinegar. You gagged, spat, and then didn't drink anything for a day and a half, out of spite. But others weren't so lucky. You've seen men dip their tin cups into the ocean in the dark, thinking no one would notice. One collapsed within the hour. Another stripped off his shirt, shouted that he was the King of France, and tried to marry the mainmast. Historians still debate just how common seawater consumption was, but diaries from the time tell the story clearly enough. "Thirst drove us mad," one sailor wrote. "I drank the brine and heard the stars laughing." Some captains tried to warn their crews, others punished it harshly. One even tied a man to the bowsprit with a sign around his neck. Drank the sea, fool. But shame doesn't go far when your throat feels like it's filled with dust and your lips crack when you breathe. Of course, there were other options. You could catch rain if it rained. Some clever men fashioned funnels from canvas or stretched their shirts out like sails to gather droplets. One built a strange contraption from pewter plates and string, catching drips and channeling them into a rum bottle. He was a hero for a week. Then someone sat on it. There was always the beer, of course, but even that ran low. When the barrels ran dry or spoiled, your choices narrowed to seawater, tears, or hoping the cook would remember how to boil something from boots. And then, occasionally, you'd get lucky. A passing storm, a cooler wind, condensation forming on the inside of the hold. Tiny things, but they felt like treasure. You once collected enough from a sail to fill half a mug. It tasted like old rope and damp linen, but it didn't hurt going down. That made it precious. Some men tried to suck moisture from food, biscuit crumbs, dried peas, old leather. One sailor gnawed on the corner of a playing card for an hour. Another squeezed grease from a meat rag like it was a lemon wedge. Desperation has many flavors, and none of them are good. Still, the sea mocked you with its abundance. Water, water, everywhere, and every drop a lie. It sloshed against the hull, glittered under moonlight, splashed in your face. You could hear it, you could feel it, and you couldn't drink it. There was a story an old boatswain told sometimes, half a joke and half a warning. A sailor once drank the sea and said it tasted like home. That's how you know he was lost. You don't laugh when he tells it anymore. Tonight you grip your mug and sip your last inch of beer. It's flat, sour, and vaguely woody. You imagine it used to be a table, maybe a chair. You savor every drop. Then you peer over the side of the ship at the endless black waves below. They shimmer like ink and promise you nothing. And that biscuit in your pocket, it's not going to help. It's just going to make you thirstier. So you settle into your hammock again. Your mouth is dry. Your thoughts are brittle. Your dreams will likely involve waterfalls or peaches or cold fountains that vanish when you reach them. But that's fine. It's better than waking up with salt on your tongue and madness in your bones. Sleep tight. Don't drink the sea. Midday brings no breeze, only stillness, the kind that makes the sails hang like wet laundry and the air taste like stew left out too long. The ship creaks lazily as though she's tired of pretending to move. You try to nap, but the heat is relentless and something keeps biting your ankle. You glance down, half expecting to see another weevil with attitude, but no, it's just a cockroach. Again, you swat at it, miss, and sigh. Because if there's one constant aboard a ship like this, aside from the biscuit in your pocket turning to gravel, it's the ever-present, ever-thriving roach population. And nowhere do they thrive more happily than in the biscuit locker. You've seen it, a dark, damp closet the size of a coffin wedged between the cook's storeroom and the gunner's hammock. The door groans like a haunted wardrobe. Inside, stacked with near-religious reverence, are sacks of hardtack. Or, as the crew calls them, roach hotels, because these cockroaches aren't visitors, they're residents, established, multi-generational. They don't scurry when you open the door, they blink. Some of them probably have names. One might be the ship's accountant. They crawl through the flour, nestle in the creases of the sacks, and burrow deep into the loaves like archaeologists. Occasionally, if you look just right, you'll see a pair of antennae poking out from a corner of what you thought was just biscuit. One sailor once joked that the real ration was cockroach, and the biscuit was just the delivery method. You all laughed. Then someone found a roach with eggs inside the hardtack. You laughed less after that. Historians still argue whether certain navies intentionally used lard or beef tallow in their biscuit sacks, making them even more attractive to pests. Some suspect that the humidity of tropical voyages made the perfect breeding ground. One theory suggests that biscuit was never the point. It was just a mobile farm for roaches, weevils, and despair. The cook, ever unfazed, simply shrugs when questioned. "Extra crunch," he says. builds character. You once saw a roach crawl into a man's mug and drown. He drank it anyway, said it added flavour. You never looked him in the eye again. And roaches are hardy little horrors. They survive storms, cold, heat, spoiled rations, and weekly cleanings with vinegar-soaked rags. One crew member tried to trap them using molasses from the rum barrel. The trap disappeared overnight, likely carried off by the very pests it was meant to catch. There's a myth passed from ship to ship, whispered in hammocks and behind barrels, that once a cockroach made it into an officer's boot and was discovered 3 weeks later, alive, well-fed, and utterly unrepentant. They say the officer started saluting it as a joke, then not as a joke. You're not sure that story's true, but you've definitely seen roaches big enough to wear tiny hats. At night, the biscuit locker comes alive. If you listen closely, it clicks. Not in the way wood does when it settles, but in the way shells do when they scuttle across each other. You once walked past in the dark and heard the unmistakable sound of chewing. Not from a human. Some tried sealing the locker with wax or tarring the outside. It worked, briefly. Until the bugs figured out new routes, new cracks, new angles. They are engineers, architects, chefs even. You found a biscuit once that had been hollowed from the inside, turned into a perfect roach cocoon, like a pastry with a nightmare filling. Still, no one throws the biscuits out. You can't, and there's nothing to replace them with. A biscuit with a roach is still a biscuit. It still fills your stomach. It still dissolves eventually. The trick is to tap it hard on the table first, then hold it up to the light, and never eat it in the dark. One enterprising fellow used to paint tiny symbols on his biscuits after inspection. A red dot meant roach-free. A blue cross meant a single carcass, but thoroughly dead. Anything unmarked? Left for the rats or Weller, who had long since stopped caring. You wonder, idly, how many cockroach legs you've eaten. 5? 50? More? You feel strangely proud. Survivors, you and the roaches, locked in this slow-motion dance of mutual disappointment. As the sun climbs higher, the heat in the hold becomes unbearable. The biscuit locker, always a little sour-smelling, now reeks of wet flour and insect musk. You retreat to the deck, gripping a mug of warm beer, and try not to think about the breakfast you didn't finish, or the crunchy bit you chose not to examine too closely. Above, gulls wheel lazily in the sky. Below, roaches continue their reign. You'll eat again tonight. You always do. You'll break your biscuit. You'll squint into its porous surface. You'll tell yourself the bits that move are just crumbs caught in a breeze. And then you'll chew and swallow and try not to listen too hard when the biscuit locker clicks. The sun has sunk behind the horizon now, leaving only a greasy smear of red across the waves, like someone spilled stew into the sky and didn't clean it up properly. The air cools, but just enough to let the scent of the lower deck waft upward, a rancid cocktail of sweat, tar, mildew, and regret. You know what that means. It's dinner time. You head down, ducking under low beams, past snoozing sailors, and a man who may or may not be talking to his sock, until you reach the makeshift galley. It's more a smoky corner than a kitchen, an iron pot swaying lazily over an open flame, a rack of blackened spoons, and the cook stirring something with a piece of wood that definitely used to be a broom handle. Tonight's menu, pork, or at least that's what he says. You've learned not to ask too many questions. If it's pinkish and chewy, it's pork. If it's greenish and chewy, it's pork with personality. And if it crunches when it shouldn't, well, that's just dinner being textural. You sit down with your tin plate and a biscuit to soak in the pork juices, both to soften it and to mask whatever's living inside. The pork glistens, not in a good way, in the way that a puddle does when something chemical has been spilled in it. You prod it with your fork, which comes away with a strand of something translucent and suspiciously worm-shaped. Here we go again. Historians still argue whether sailors of the 18th century regularly consumed maggot-infested meat, or if this was just the occasional horror. Based on your daily experience, the horror was quite regular. Some barrels arrived on board fresh, sealed, salted and acceptable. Others looked like they'd been forgotten behind the butcher's shop for a year, then blessed by a swarm of flies. The maggots were part of the package deal. You've seen pork with more larvae than fat. Chunks so riddled with movement they looked like they were breathing. And yet the meat was rarely tossed. Not because the sailors were heartless, but because they were hungry. If the meat wriggled, you shook it. If it squirmed, you boiled it. If it squirmed after boiling, you cursed, closed your eyes and chewed faster. You remember the day a man named Jory discovered a live maggot halfway through chewing. He spit it into his hand, blinked twice, and then shrugged and popped it back in. "Tastes better than biscuit," he said. He was not wrong. Maggots weren't the only worry. Sometimes you got lucky and it was just spoilage, pale patches, a sour smell, meat that flaked like dried paint. But occasionally you'd hit a real treasure. Cartilage, hooves, fragments of things that clacked against your teeth. One man bit down and pulled out a pig's tooth. He cleaned it, strung it on a bit of twine, and wore it like a charm. You take your first bite now. It's salty, painfully so, like licking the underside of an anchor, but it's soft, and that's something. It doesn't crunch, it doesn't writhe, it just squishes. You've trained yourself not to think about the texture too much. In the corner, someone throws up quietly into a bucket. The cook whistles as he stirs the next pot. He claims the maggots add flavour. "Nature's spice," he calls them. You're pretty sure he's kidding. But not completely sure. Sailors had their coping mechanisms. Some dunked every bite in beer. Others rolled their pork in biscuit crumbs like it was a fine cutlet. A few brave souls would sear the outside with hot irons to burn the filth away. It never worked. It only added a smoky crust to whatever horror lay beneath. There were theories, too. Some believed that if you ate the maggots, they'd fight the scurvy. Others claimed the worms crawled out if you insulted them loud enough. One man kept whispering threats to his pork before each meal. It seemed to help, or maybe he just went fully mad. You chew slowly, methodically. Chewing is key. You never want to swallow anything you haven't fully negotiated with. Your throat's been ambushed before, and you always check the bottom of the plate, just in case. One time, you flipped your meal over and found an entire beetle baked into the fat layer. Its legs were still intact. You named it Captain Crisp. There's an unspoken rule aboard the ship. If your meat moves, you win. You get bragging rights. If it squeaks, you get a day off. That's a joke, mostly. One unlucky lad had a piece of pork so pungent it knocked him flat before the first bite. The cook declared him too delicate and sent him to scrub latrines until he grew a stronger stomach. And yet every night you come back. Own back. Every sailor does, because this isn't about taste. It's about survival. And maybe, just maybe, a little about defiance. You stare into the abyss of your plate, fork raised like a sword, and declare, "Not today, worm." The pork is gone now, the biscuit's soggy but edible. You scrape the last of the grease from the tin and mop it up. You sit back, stomach uneasy but full, and let out a long sigh. Somewhere in the galley the cook sings to himself as he cracks open another barrel. You hear something skitter. Tomorrow's pork is waking up. The next morning arrives with a thud, courtesy of a loose coil of rope smacking you across the face as the ship lurches on a sudden swell. You blink awake, mouth dry, stomach already preparing its usual protest. There's a familiar pressure just behind your eyes, and your tongue feels like it spent the night absorbing biscuit dust straight from the locker. You sit up, and there's a fresh sound in the air. Not the groan of timber or the rhythmic slap of waves, but the distinct tick, tick, tick of tiny legs over wood. And you already know what that means. The mealworms are back. You follow the noise toward the stores, your boots scuffing softly on the boards. You reach the biscuit locker and stop. There, scattered around the base, are little tan curls. You know those shapes too well by now. Mealworms, some dead, some twitching like they're still in denial. You open the locker cautiously. No sudden moves. Inside, the biscuits are stacked high, neat, tight, crumbly monoliths of misery. And crawling through the cracks, nestled into the flowery folds, is a tiny ecosystem of larval terror. You stare at them for a moment, wondering, not for the first time, if they might unionize. Someone once joked that the worms had been aboard longer than the captain. Another swore the ship's log had to be updated to include them as crew. "Mealworm, midshipman third class," he said, tipping his hat toward a particularly fat one. Historians still argue whether mealworms were a constant or just a seasonal horror. Some ships saw them all the time, some only in the tropics. One theory suggests that the eggs were already in the flour before the biscuits were ever baked. Heat didn't kill them, just delayed their little voyage. So by the time you cracked open a fresh biscuit weeks or months later, voila, breakfast and bonus protein. You pick one up now. The biscuit, not the worm, though honestly at this point they're a package deal. You flip it over, no visible movement, you give it a shake, still nothing. Then, just as you lift it to your mouth, a tiny, pale noodle of a thing pokes out of a crack and waves at you like it's asking for passage. You sigh and put the biscuit down. Back in your first weeks aboard, this would have ruined your appetite. Now it's just part of the routine. You know the tricks. Bang it on the table. Roll it on your sleeve. Or, for the truly daring, leave it in the sun until the worms crawl out in protest. Weller once tried soaking his biscuit in beer to drown the worms. Didn't work. They swam. There's a sort of dark admiration that grows over time. These little things so fragile, so small, and yet here they are, surviving storms, salt air, and spoiled meat. One biscuit fell overboard and was fished out 3 days later, still intact, still housing at least 3 live mealworms. You named that one Admiral Crunch. Some sailors tried to fight back. Powdered chalk, crushed herbs, one even stuffed his biscuit sack with tobacco leaves. It worked, briefly, until the worms started turning brown and jittery and, somehow, faster. Nobody touched his sack again. You bring the biscuit back to your mouth. Maybe if you bite fast, you won't taste the difference. Maybe if you chew with conviction, the worms will mistake you for one of their own. The logic doesn't make sense, but out here not much does. You take a bite, dry, grainy, and then soft. You pause. Chew slower. Something wiggles against your tongue, or maybe it's just a flake of wet flour. You'll never know. You swallow and decide not to think about it anymore. The mealworms aren't the worst after all. They're quiet, mild. Unlike the weevils, they don't bite. Unlike the cockroaches, they don't stare. They just exist. Harmless, mostly. Passive participants in your slow descent into culinary despair. In a strange way, they've become part of the ship's rhythm. You brush them off your blanket in the morning. You flick them from your plate at noon. At night, you sometimes dream about them. Tiny white boats sailing across your belly, paddling through tea made of biscuit broth and grog. There's a legend that floats from ship to ship, that somewhere out there a cook once embraced the infestation. Mealworm stew, he called it, a mix of biscuit paste, grog, and the worms themselves sautéed in pork grease. Some said it wasn't bad, most just gagged. The cook was eventually reassigned to lighthouse duty. But you wouldn't be surprised if someone out here has tried it again. After all, it's protein, it moves, it counts. You finish the biscuit. There's a tiny crunch at the end, but you pretend it's just an extra toasty crumb. You sip your beer to wash it down. The beer tastes slightly better now. Maybe the biscuit numbed your taste buds. And then before you can dwell too long on what just wriggled its way into your digestive history, you dust your hands, pat your stomach, and step back into the sun. Another biscuit down. A few hundred more to go. And somewhere inside the locker, the next batch is already hatching. Night drapes itself over the ship like an old wool blanket, scratchy, damp, and full of things you'd rather not name. The stars blink into place, indifferent to your dinner, and a warm wind wafts up from the galley hold. It carries with it the unmistakable scent of despair, reheated. Overcooked beans, salt, and something earthy. something moving. It's time for the midnight snack you didn't ask for. You're halfway to your hammock when you feel it. A light, ticklish flutter just beneath your shirt collar. You slap at it instinctively, and out plops a small wriggling thing. You freeze. So does it. For a half second, you lock eyes, assuming it has eyes, and then it zips off across the deck like it knows it's not supposed to be here. Mealworm? Nope, too fast. Weevil? Wrong shape. That, dear friend, was something worse. That was a late-night stowaway, a roach larva, which means only one thing. The biscuits have migrated. You head back toward your locker, just to check, just to see. You push open the lid to your small, private ration chest, and sure enough, there's movement. Not fast, not dramatic. Just slow, methodical twitching among the crumbs, as if your food has become aware of its own tragic fate and is preparing an escape. This is not the first time your rations have tried to walk away. The problem isn't the food itself. Well, no, that's a lie, it is the food. But the bigger problem is the bedding. The biscuits don't stay in their sacks. Over time, the crumbs spread. The smell seeps into your hammock, your shirt, your boots. One evening, you sat down to rest and found 3 beetle shells beneath your blanket and a biscuit fragment inside your pillow. There is no privacy, no barrier. The food becomes part of you. Mealworms crawl into your socks. Roaches nest in the folds of your coat. Biscuit shards get ground into your scalp when you sleep too close to the stores. One sailor found a half-crushed cockroach beneath his armpit. He named it Wilson. He claimed they shared dreams. Historians still argue whether ships were always this infested, or if certain routes, longer voyages through hotter waters, were especially cursed. Tropical heat, combined with damp air and low airflow, turned every hold into a breeding ground. Biscuit sacks became bug creches, and the bugs, it turns out, were not picky about where they wandered. You will swat at your neck again, a faint squish. You don't look. There's a trick some old sailors use, hanging their hammocks over open barrels of vinegar or tobacco. The fumes help drive away the smaller bugs, but you tried that once, and all it drove away was your ability to breathe through your nose. Then there's Finn, the oldest member of the crew, who claims he's immune. Says he's eaten so many infested biscuits that the bugs respect him. You're not sure if he's joking or just very, very tired. He's got that faraway look, like someone who's seen too many crunchy things in the night. You return to your hammock and gingerly shake out the blanket. A few specks tumble out. One moves. You flick it away without flinching. That's the worst part, how used to it you've become. The ship rocks gently. The creak of the mast sounds almost like breathing. Somewhere, a sailor coughs, then mutters something about his biscuit, whispering to him. No one responds. It's not even strange anymore. You pull the blanket up to your chin and settle in. Something rustles near your hip. You ignore it. Because what else are you going to do? The bugs aren't going away. The biscuits aren't changing. And the cook, he's probably already prepping breakfast, whistling cheerfully as he cracks open another bag of edible anxiety. So you do what every sailor does. You sleep with one eye open, one boot nearby for smashing, and one mouthful of bitter acceptance. The bugs don't rest, but neither do you, at least not for long. You wake up to something crunching, not beneath your boots, not under your hammock ropes, but inside your mouth. That slow, dry crumble of biscuit dust clinging to your teeth like old regrets. You sit up, confused, and spit. A tiny flake of something white lands on your sleeve. You stare at it. You didn't eat in your sleep, did you? But no, this is just another gift from the sea. The biscuits are so omnipresent, so woven into your life out here, they seem to follow you into your dreams. And your molars are not happy about it. You flex your jaw, and there's that familiar dull ache. Not pain, exactly, just a quiet, chronic protest from your gums. A warning, because out here, every bite is a gamble, and hardtack plays for keeps. Today, it's worse than usual. Maybe because the cook found an older sack. Maybe because this batch was baked during a solar eclipse. But the biscuit you've just been handed looks industrial, like it was forged, not baked. You knock it against the rail. It makes a noise like a drawer closing. This one's earned a name, the toothbreaker. Historians still puzzle over the exact consistency of 18th century hardtack. Surviving samples, some kept in museums and one famously still intact after nearly 200 years, suggest a density somewhere between fired clay and petrified wood. The joke goes, if it crumbles, it's stale. If it shatters your jaw, it's fresh. And of course, the longer the voyage, the harder the bread. Moisture evaporates. The loaves turn beige to grey. Occasionally, and they flake into powder, but more often, they fossilize. You once watched a sailor, big guy, strong teeth, proud jaw, take a bite and go instantly pale. He spat the chunk into his hand and stared at it like it had personally insulted him. His tooth? Still embedded in the biscuit? The biscuit? Unimpressed. To avoid that fate, men have invented methods. One taps the bread against his skull like a tuning fork, says it hums differently when it's safe. Another uses a small hammer and chisel, carving his meal into bite-sized gravel. You prefer the soak method, submerge the biscuit in beer until it's soft enough to resemble food, or at least not resemble a paving stone, but even soaked, the danger remains. You remember the tale of the man who, too impatient to wait, bit down on a corner of hardtack and split his molar clean in two. He had to carry the tooth around for weeks in a tobacco pouch, hoping the ship's next port would have a surgeon. Spoiler, it didn't. Instead, the cook sterilized a spoon with fire, and 3 men held him down while the offending shard was yanked out with tongs meant for the stove. The tooth came out with a sound you still hear in your dreams, like someone tearing fabric slowly with a scream. Since then you've become cautious, biscuit first, bite second, never the reverse. There are whisperings, myths, of a loaf so hard it was used in combat. One ship's log jokingly records a mutiny that ended when the captain threw a biscuit and knocked a man unconscious. Whether true or not, the image stays with you. Food as weapon, as warning, as judicial tool. And the captains? Oh, they didn't escape the tooth trials either. One admiral's diary includes a complaint: ration bread, most uncivil, split a molar afore breakfast. He later requested all biscuits be steamed. The crew responded by calling him a lady porridge. Out here, broken teeth are more than an inconvenience. They're dangerous. An open wound in the mouth invites infection, and on a ship with no dentist, no antibiotics, and one surgical saw that's already seen too much action, that can mean fever, rot, or worse. One man died from an abscess. It spread. His jaw swelled like a melon. His eye bulged. And within days, he was delirious. His last words were something about a whistling cracker, and then he just stopped. After that, you swore off biting. You soak, you chip, you let the biscuit surrender first. But the irony, sometimes you miss the bite, that sharp resistance, that moment when your teeth meet their match and you feel briefly powerful. Foolish, yes, but alive. There's even a kind of hierarchy. The younger sailors bite boldly, lose a filling and learn humility. The older ones soak until their biscuit dissolves into grey mush. Somewhere in the middle is you, counting molars and calculating risk. Tonight's biscuit is still on the table, untouched. You stare at it under the flickering lantern. Its corners are sharp enough to cut rope. Its edges curl upward slightly, like it's smiling. You pour a splash of beer into your tin, drop the biscuit in, and wait. It hisses faintly. That's probably not a good sign. But it's a sign you've come to trust. A bit of bubbling, normal, frothing, less so. You tap it once with the handle of your spoon. It doesn't give. You tap again, still firm. You check your molars with your tongue, still intact for now. Then slowly, cautiously, you lift the soggy end to your mouth and take a bite. It yields. You survive, but just barely. Later that night, as the ship rocks gently under a tapestry of stars and snores echo from hammocks slung like pale cocoons, you lie awake, hand resting on your still sore jaw, thinking about what you've just done. You bit into a biscuit that was almost soft. You lived to tell the tale. But your gums are humming a quiet protest, like they're composing a sea shanty titled, "Why Did You Do This to Us Again?" You shift, trying to find a comfortable position. The hammock creaks. From the shadows nearby, someone mumbles in their sleep. Something about worms and jam. You don't want to know. You close your eyes, and then you smell it. Not the usual cocktail of brine, sweat, and damp wood. No, this is new, sharp, pungent, a little sweet, a little sour, like old socks boiled in vinegar and forgotten under a bed. You know that smell. Someone's opened a new ration barrel. The next morning confirms it. The cook is grinning with teeth that look like weathered fence posts as he gestures proudly toward his latest acquisition, a barrel of cheese, or more accurately, a cheese-like substance once recognizable as food and now best described as dairy's final form. It's grey around the edges, yellow at the center. There's a thin sheen of oil on top that quivers slightly when the deck shifts. You're not entirely sure it's not alive. A sailor pokes it with a knife. The knife doesn't come back clean. Still, everyone lines up. Because even questionable cheese is a break from the monotony of biscuit and beef, a luxury even. You think back to port towns where cheese came in neat wedges, wrapped in wax paper and smelling faintly of fresh straw. You remember soft brie, sharp cheddar, hard manchego, all now reduced to this sweating, lumpen mass of maybe food. You watch as the first chunk is served. It oozes slightly, not in a melty way, in a leaky way. The crewman who receives it sniffs, shrugs, and shovels it onto a slice of hardtack. The biscuit bends slightly. That's never happened before. You brace yourself. Your portion is smaller than you'd hoped, about the size of a matchbox, but heavier than expected, dense, damp, with a faint ammonia tang that makes your eyes water. You cut it carefully with the side of your spoon. It resists like muscle. There's something oddly stringy at the center. You pretend not to notice. Historians still argue whether ship cheese was meant to age into this condition, or if that was simply the result of poor sealing, heat, and a complete lack of standards. Some barrels were lined with leaves or herbs in an effort to preserve the cheese. Others were simply salted to oblivion and then left to stew in their own oils. One record from a Dutch ship mentions cheese so old it spoke Latin. Another journal describes sailors using the hardened rind to patch holes in the hull. The implication being it was both waterproof and mildly sentient. You take a bite. The flavor hits first, sharp, sour, then funky, then wrong. It has a texture somewhere between rubber and wet clay. Your teeth meet something chewy. You pause, chew again, regret everything. A drop of oil trickles down your chin. You wipe it away before it burns a hole in your shirt. Still you swallow, because that's the deal, isn't it? You eat what's handed to you. You chew until your teeth complain. You swallow before your brain catches up. And then you hope your stomach isn't in the mood to riot. In the corner, someone is humming. Another sailor is holding his biscuit like a cracker and delicately balancing a slab of cheese on top like it's a delicacy. He chews with his pinky extended. You want to mock him. You also want to be him. The smell lingers in the air like a challenge, a miasma of dairy defiance. It clings to your fingers, your breath, your memories. One man tries to wash his hands with grog. It only makes him smell like cheese that's been to a tavern. Eventually, the cook reseals the barrel. Not tightly enough. That's deliberate. He claims sealing it too tight makes it ferment angry, whatever that means. That night, the dreams come again. Only this time, it's not worms or biscuits that haunt you. It's the cheese, a giant wobbling wheel with legs. It chases you through a labyrinth of barrels, whispering in Latin. You wake in a cold sweat. You're not sure if you're afraid or just hungry. By morning, the smell is still there. You look at your breakfast, biscuit again. But beside it, a tiny sliver of leftover cheese. You hesitate, then smear it across the biscuit like lard. You take a bite. It's terrible, it's chewy, it's warm, but it's different. And that's enough. By midday, the sun is so bright it feels personal, like it's trying to punish you for every bad biscuit you've ever eaten. The tar on the deck softens underfoot, and the salt air burns in your nostrils. Somewhere above, a gull circles, watching the ship with the judgmental gaze of a creature that's never had to eat pickled pudding. You shade your eyes, stomach groaning softly, and brace yourself as the midday meal arrives. It's in a tin bowl, a tin.
That's always a bad sign. You peer in. It's brown, lumpy, shiny in patches, smells vaguely of raisins and definitely of sorrow. You lift your spoon, poke at the center, and it jiggles, not the fun kind of jiggle, like jelly.
This is the type of motion that makes you question if it's finished becoming something. The cook beams from behind the pot. "Pudding," he declares. You pause. "Of what?" He wink. "Ship's secret." That's not reassuring. Welcome to the strange and storied tradition of 18th century naval pudding, a dish so misnamed it ought to have triggered an international tribunal. Because this isn't dessert, this isn't sweet, this is a grim paste, boiled in old cloth, with ingredients that read like a dare. Rations were tight, fresh supplies rarer still. So puddings became the garbage bins of the galley, meat scraps, stale biscuit crumbs, dried peas, powdered egg if you were lucky, salt pork if you were not, and whatever else could be chopped, mashed, and tied into a lump with string. Boiled in seawater, served with pride, eaten with prayer. Historians still debate what exactly went into these puddings. Some say sweet, others insist on powdered bone meal or dried turnip rinds. One surviving recipe includes any meat of questionable freshness, and a generous splash of molasses if you want to pretend it's festive. Another source simply lists whatever's left 3 times in a row. You take a bite, it's dense, like chewing through a book someone dropped in the ocean. There's something chewy, something crunchy, and disturbingly, something that fizzes just a little. You hope that's a spice, maybe ginger, maybe panic. A sailor beside you grins with a mouthful of grey. "Bit of tongue in this one," he says cheerfully. "Might be pig, might be someone's old boot." You smile weakly and keep chewing. The strange thing, it's not the worst thing you've eaten aboard this ship. That honour probably still belongs to the lime and biscuit stew from 2 weeks ago, or the mouldy beef that glowed faintly in the dark. Still, pudding has its own special texture. Every bite reveals a new mystery, a lump of fat, a peppercorn, what you hope was a raisin. Some parts feel cold even when the rest is hot. One piece crunches like eggshells, another dissolves into a powdery sadness that clings to the roof of your mouth. One sailor once claimed to find a feather in his. No one knows if it was from a chicken or a rat. He kept it anyway, tied it to his hat. There's also the question of pudding shape. These things aren't served in bowls. They come wrapped in cloth, tied off like a big, sweating dumpling, and sliced with whatever knife isn't too rusty. Sometimes they collapse on the plate, sometimes they bounce. If it bounces twice, the cook takes that as a compliment. And the puddings get nicknames. There's barnacle cake for the salt-heavy batch, fog pie for the greyest ones, gallows dumpling when someone finds a button inside. You once had a slice that tasted unmistakably of fish, despite the cook's claims of beefy undertones, yet somehow it's become comfort food. You see it in the way the older sailors light up when they smell the cloth unwrapping. You hear it in their stories. "Reminds me of Mum's," one says wistfully, though hers didn't squirm. Another nods solemnly. It's the texture, makes you feel alive. Some add molasses if they're lucky enough to steal a spoonful from the rum ration. Others crumble biscuit into it like breadcrumbs, adding crunch to an already overly textured situation. You once saw someone press a slice between 2 biscuits and eat it like a sandwich. He called it the Admiral's regret. You push your bowl away after 3 bites. Your spoon stands straight up in the center, perfectly still. That should not be possible. Later you walk past the cook's prep table and see a fresh batch of pudding mix, greyish paste, lumps of fat, and what appears to be a squashed fig. Maybe. You decide not to ask. He's humming a sea shanty as he stirs. The pot smells of pepper and deep denial. That night, your dreams are vivid and strange. You're in a ballroom, dancing with a pudding in a powdered wig. It whispers your name. You wake with a start, breathless, heart racing, and a strange craving for molasses. You sit up, wipe the biscuit dust from your chest and laugh softly. This ship has changed you. You used to flinch at hardtack. Now you're making polite conversation with your pudding before stabbing it. Progress. It's early evening, and the sun slinks toward the horizon like a thief, stealing the last bits of warmth from the deck. The sky glows orange-pink, deceptively serene, while below, in the galley, something terrible is being born. You can smell it from the mainmast, a thick, yeasty stench like someone tried to bake regret into a loaf. You glance toward the pot, then back at your crewmate, who is already turning a delicate shade of green.
"Is that dessert?" he asks. The cook beams. "Pudding again, but sweet this time." You should have run. He calls it spotted dog, though there's no dog involved, at least you hope. And the spots? Well, they might be raisins. They might be rat droppings. They might be both. At this point in the voyage, who's checking? The sweet pudding is supposed to be a treat, a reward, a comfort. Theoretically, made with flour, suet, dried fruit, and treacle, if you're lucky. If not, it's just leftover biscuit crumbs, pork fat, and a few suspicious flecks of colour that may have once been currants, or something someone found in the folds of their coat. And if the day's been particularly unfortunate, it comes with a generous scoop of lumpy, lukewarm sauce. This, the cook proudly calls duff sauce. It jiggles. You lift your spoon and let it slide off. It doesn't drip, it slumps, like it's tired of pretending to be edible. Historians still debate the contents of these sauces.
Some say they were made with boiled molasses and butter, others with egg yolks and stale ale, still others with nothing more than salt, flour, and vague ambition. Some recipes even call for boiled flour water, thickened with bone marrow. Yum. You take a bite of pudding. The spots stick to your teeth. One feels like it might have legs. You chew carefully, counting slowly in your head as if pacing might help. It's sweet, sort of. Sticky. A little gritty, which is strange, considering nothing in it should be crunchy. It tastes faintly of iron, more strongly of sock. Then comes the sauce. It coats your tongue like warm glue. You cough once, involuntarily. The man across from you grins. "Sticks to your ribs, eh?" he says, pounding his chest proudly. He means it as a compliment. You nod solemnly and fight the urge to lick the wall just to reset your taste buds. Still, there's something oddly comforting about it. It's not delicious, it's not even food in the modern sense, but it's different. Sweetness is a rare treasure on a ship like this, where every other meal is salted, brined, or crawling. This is a break from mould, bugs, and boiled despair. One sailor closes his eyes as he eats, murmuring something that sounds like a lullaby. Another crumbles his entire slice into his grog, calling it pudding soup. You see someone spooning duff sauce onto a biscuit, as if inventing a new dessert. You make a mental note to report them to the captain. There are stories, of course, always stories, about puddings made with real brandy and studded with dates, about cooks who knew the secrets of citrus peel and almond flour. One man swears he ate a pudding once that made him cry, of joy. No one believes him, but he tells it every time the pot appears. You finish your bowl, slowly, carefully. The last bite is the sweetest. Or maybe your taste buds just gave up and let nostalgia take over. Afterward, the cook returns with something new, a cup of dark liquid.
"Fig tea," he announces, which sounds almost civilized until you remember you haven't seen a fig in weeks. You sniff it, smoky, bitter, slightly fruity. It tastes like old rum strained through someone's boot, but it's warm, and it doesn't bite back, so you drink. As night falls, the crew lounges on the deck, bellies full of sweet and sugar, groaning softly. Someone starts humming. The cook whistles as he washes his ladle in seawater. Above, the stars blink on like slow applause. And just for a moment, a brief pudding-fueled moment. Things don't feel so bad. You still have biscuit in your blanket. There's a cockroach living in your shoe. But for now, your stomach is full, your mouth isn't bleeding, and your teeth are all present and accounted for. The ship rocks gently and your eyelids grow heavy. You let yourself drift. Tomorrow the meat might crawl, the beer might explode.
But tonight? Tonight you got pudding. By morning, the pudding's warmth has faded from your memory, leaving behind only a dull, sticky coating on your tongue and a burble in your gut that feels a bit too active. You sit up slowly, eyeing your hammock ropes to make sure they haven't frayed in the night, because nothing on this ship lasts long under tension, especially not your stomach lining. As you stretch, Weller passes by, looking pale and holding his sides. "Wasn't pudding," he mutters. "Was cheese in disguise." You nod solemnly. You believe him. Today brings a new horror, or perhaps just an old one, in a new coat. The cook announces it proudly. "Fresh barrel, lads. Looks fuzzy, but that's just extra flavour." Everyone groans. You already know what he means. It's time to face the mysterious, ever-growing legend of the biscuit fungus. You arrive at the stores and see it for yourself. A half-empty sack of hardtack, the top layer dusted with what looks like blue-grey snow.
Fluffy, powdery, possibly trying to spread. One sailor leans close and whispers, "That's the good mould, like cheese mould, adds depth." Another elbows him. "That's the death mould, you idiot, the kind that gives you night fevers and shadow coughing." Historians still argue whether the fungi found on ships' biscuits were generally harmful, harmless, or hallucinogenic.
Journals from the time often refer to stale bloom, bread frost, or, most ominously, the whispering powder. Some medical records mention vivid dreams, rashes, and temporary blindness following particularly mouldy rations. One theory claims the spores developed from damp flour and warm holds. Another insists some captains simply reused biscuit sacks for too long, letting moisture and rot take hold. Either way, the result is the same: a biscuit that smells like a musty cupboard and tastes like an old barn. You pick one up now and examine it. The mould is patchy, clustered in corners, like it's trying to find the best way in. You knock it gently on the table, and a puff of spores rises into the air like an exorcism. The wind catches it. Weller sneezes so hard he nearly falls overboard. You contemplate scraping it. Some do, with spoons, with belt knives. One fellow uses a flint. You've tried it before, scrubbing at the biscuit until it's just a ghost of its former self, stripped of fuzz and pride. But the taste lingers, mould doesn't forget. You sigh, then tap the biscuit against the rail. No cracking, no weevils, just quiet mould. You decide that counts as a win. Then you soak it in beer. The beer bubbles around the mouldy crust, turning slightly green at the edges. You sip cautiously. It burns a little, not like alcohol, more like mint, and mildew had a disagreement in your throat. Your teeth tingle. That could be psychological. You take a bite. It's not the worst thing you've eaten. It's weirdly sweet, faintly floral, like someone dipped a crouton in perfume and left it in the sun. The crew calls it ghost biscuit. They claim the mould gives you visions. You suspect it gives you mild food poisoning and a tendency to hear sea shanties when no one's singing. Still, a few sailors swear by it. They hoard the mouldiest rations, stacking them like relics. One even carved his into the shape of a fish and talks to it. "Captain Crumble," he calls it. No one argues with him anymore. Later, while coiling rope, you feel light. The deck sways more than usual, or maybe your legs are swaying, you're not sure. The clouds above seem to shimmer. The sails whisper your name. You blink. The feeling passes, but it's not the worst hallucination you've had on this ship. Some sailors, especially those who've eaten particularly fuzzy slices, report vivid dreams of land, fruit trees, warm beds, and the sound of children laughing. Others wake up screaming about biscuit armies and weevil generals. The line between dreams and mould is thin out here. Still, you finish the biscuit, slowly, carefully. The mould isn't aggressive, but it has personality. You chew around the fluff. You avoid the corners that sparkle strangely in the light. Then you wash it down with water. Well, water-flavoured beer. At this point, it's all the same. The cook pops his head up from below. "Next barrel's clean," he calls. "No mould, just a few friendly roaches." Everyone groans. One sailor says, Bring back the fungus. At least that didn't bite. You sit back against the rail, the mouldy aftertaste curling like a leaf in the back of your throat. You feel oddly at peace. Maybe the ghost biscuit wasn't trying to harm you after all. Maybe it just wanted to be remembered. The wind is back today, stiff and eager, snapping through the sails like a banner of war. The ship groans with motion, and your hammock sways wildly, creaking like it might file a complaint. You stagger out onto the deck, feeling both hungry and slightly concussed, still tasting ghost biscuit in the corners of your memory. By the time the midday ration is called, your stomach's staging a quiet protest. It doesn't want biscuit, it doesn't want cheese, it wants anything that doesn't require soaking, scraping, or blindfolding to swallow. But the barrel opens and it's empty. There's a moment of silence. A rare, heavy pause as the crew collectively realizes what this means. You're out of food. And now it's Hunger Games on the high seas. To be clear, the ship isn't stranded yet, but provisions are tight and you're still days, maybe weeks, from the next port. The cook scratches his beard, peers into the empty barrel, and announces he's going to improvise. You have never heard a more terrifying word. The first change is the rations. They're halved. Biscuit fragments instead of full loaves, half mugs of beer, more water than beer now, a few handfuls of dried peas boiled so long they become green mush. One lad starts licking the pot afterward, another volunteers to clean the cook's ladle with his face. People start getting creative. You see men cracking open barrels not meant for eating, supply crates, old boxes of rope and pitch, just to make sure there's nothing edible inside. One sailor eats a candle. Another tries to fry twine in grog. The rats, which once inspired disgust, are now suspiciously interesting. You overhear whispers. Saw one big as a loaf down in the hold, someone says. Could feed 3. Someone else laughs, not a happy laugh. More of a I've considered it and made peace with the consequences laugh. Historians still argue how often sailors turned to extreme food sources on long voyages. Accounts vary. Some ships kept chickens for fresh eggs and meat, but most were eaten early in the trip. Some ships brought goats or pigs, but they either died or were consumed during storms or celebrations. After that, well, things got creative. You find yourself eyeing the leather straps on a fellow sailor's bag. They're worn, salt-cured, technically organic. You look away before you start calculating boiling time. Then comes the moment everyone dreads, the mystery stew. The cook serves it with a smile. You stare into your bowl. It's brownish, it smells vaguely meaty. But nothing you recognize. A few shreds of something stringy, some white lumps, possibly rice, possibly tendon. You eat it because hunger doesn't care what you believe in. It's fine, soft, warm, flavorless. If you ignore the back of the throat bitterness, you ask no questions. You choose slowly. You notice fewer weevils than usual. That's almost disappointing. Rumors begin. One man claims the cook is boiling up rats. Another insists it's salted boot leather. Someone says they saw the cook pour in grease from the rigging. You choose not to listen. Desperation does strange things to people. One sailor chews on rope for hours, insisting it helps the jaw remember what food feels like. Another mixes biscuit crumbs with his beard trimmings and forms a cake. He eats it with ceremony. You try not to vomit. By the third day of half rations, a quiet hunger settles over the ship. Not the kind that roars, the kind that whines. Your body slows down. Your thoughts drift. Your thoughts. Every movement takes effort. The cook's ladle starts to look shiny, pointed, useful. You dream of apples. You've never particularly liked apples, but in your sleep you bite into one the size of your head, and it bleeds cider. You wake up chewing your blanket. Still the crew manages, just barely. Jokes get darker, smiles disappear, but no one's cracked yet. Until the fish incident. A sailor named Barley hooks something over the side. Small, silver, still twitching. He lifts it triumphantly, and the entire crew turns at once, eyes shining, jaws slack. You all take a step toward him in perfect, horrifying unison. Barley blinks. "It's mine," he says. No one responds. That night he sleeps with the fish tucked in his shirt. The next morning both are gone. The cook serves stew that smells fresher than usual. No one speaks, everyone chews, very slowly. You don't ask. You never ask. Because in times of hunger, the sea offers few options. Biscuit, beef, worms, mould, pudding, fish, even rat. It's all survival. It's all part of the voyage. And besides, barley was never that popular. The ship is quieter now, not from peace, mind you, but from preservation. Every movement takes energy and no one wants to waste an ounce. Conversations are reduced to nods. Laughs are rare. Even the usual cursing between the rigging teams has faded into a kind of sullen telepathy. And yet, every evening, without fail, the rum rations arrive, because somehow, miraculously, the barrels of rum remain untouched. You stare at the mug in your hands, the liquid inside glinting like molten copper in the lamplight. It smells warm, sharp, slightly sweet. A strange comfort in a place where food is war and every bite is betrayal. And while biscuit might shatter your teeth and beef might revolt in your gut, rum always delivers. This is your daily dose of chaos. The Royal Navy rationed it out in measured servings, half a pint a day, usually split between morning and evening. Mixed with water to make grog, it became tradition, medicine, reward, punishment, and sometimes disaster. Tonight, you sip slowly. The warmth spreads instantly down your throat, across your chest, into your stomach, where it soothes the gnawing hollow left by mystery stew and biscuit dust. For a moment you feel human again, but rum doesn't just make you warm, it makes you bold. You look around, someone's singing, loudly, off-key, a shanty that rhymes mermaid with bellyache. Another sailor is dancing with a coil of rope, calling it Lady Cordelia. You know how this ends, you've seen it before. Historians still argue whether the daily rum ration helped morale or fractured it. One camp believes it was vital, something to hold on to when the sea stripped everything else away. Another points to the brawls, the accidents, the fire in the powder hold that someone once tried to extinguish with more rum. You recall that story vividly. The ship didn't sink, but the gunner lost his eyebrows. The thing is, rum on an empty stomach is a gamble. On a ship-wide empty stomach, it's a full-blown dice game with the gods. Some men become philosophers. Others become poets. A few become puddles. One sailor climbed the mast last week, claiming he could see land. Spoiler, he couldn't. Another tried to marry the anchor. And then there's Gibbs. Nobody knows his real name anymore. He's just Gibbs, the man who handles rum like it's mother's milk. He drinks first, drinks last, and somehow never falls. While others slur and stumble, Gibbs grows sharper, louder, sometimes naked. Tonight he stands at the helm, arms wide, quoting ancient Roman philosophers and waving a biscuit like it's a sword. "Let them eat cake," he bellows, "or at least this semi-edible floor tile." You sip your own ration and shake your head. The grog isn't strong, it's watered down, barely more than a suggestion of alcohol, but after weeks of bland stew, mouldy bread, and hallucinated apples, even suggestions carry weight. The real danger isn't the rum, it's what comes after. The arguments start quietly. "You took my biscuit." "No, I took my biscuit, you're just confused." "Then why is it warm?" "Why are you warm?" Then comes the shouting, the clatter, the fists. It happens quickly, like lightning from a clear sky. And it usually ends in two men rolling around on the deck, limbs flailing, teeth gnashing, until someone pours grog over their heads and calls it a draw. One night, someone actually tried to duel over a spilled mug, with spoons. You were the referee, but the worst is the quiet drunk, the man who stares into the sea, rum forgotten in his hand, and hums a tune no one else knows. You've sat next to him, you've heard the lyrics, they're in no language you recognize, and when you ask, he just says, "My mother taught me," and doesn't speak again until dawn. Yet, despite the chaos, no one refuses the rum. It's a ritual, a rare moment of agency. You drink it slowly, savoring the weight of the tin, the way it settles in your chest, anchoring you to this creaky, bug-infested miracle of a boat. It's your shield against the cold, your balm for biscuit bruises. your only guarantee that for a few minutes each evening, the world will feel slightly softer. And so you raise your mug and clink it gently against Weller's, who smiles with cracked lips and a far-off look in his eyes. You both drink. The cook walks by with a wink and whispers, "Tomorrow's stew might have a little kick if I can sneak some in." You nod. You hope. The stars spin a little more tonight. The sails flap like applause. And below deck, someone is composing a love song to cheese. Rum doesn't fix anything, but it blurs it, just enough to make you think maybe it could. By dawn, the rum has worn off, but the butter hasn't. It lingers, not because you ate much of it. Oh no, you wouldn't dare. You tried. You really did. But last night's butter ration came with an odour, the kind that wakes your ancestors. It smelled like damp rope left in a goat barn. Like someone had whispered cream to a vat of old lard and then left it in the sun for a fortnight. Even now the taste clings to the back of your throat. Greasy, sour, vaguely fishy. You could scrub your tongue with biscuit shards and it'd still be there. You're not sure if you ate it or if it somehow just seeped into your bloodstream by proximity. This was supposed to be a treat. Butter days don't come often. It's one of those luxury items brought out to boost morale. Spread on hardtack, it turns dust into something almost edible, in theory. You remember the barrel being cracked open. A crowd had gathered, hopeful. The cook made a big show of it, wiping the rim, inhaling dramatically, and then he gagged, and that should have been the end of it. Close the lid, toss it overboard, pretend it never happened. But no, butter was butter, and on a ship this far out, desperation makes optimists of us all. The first spoonful came out grey. That's not a typo, not yellow, not creamy white. Grey, like wet cement with dreams. It shimmered in the light, not in a magical way, in a this might be slightly radioactive way. Still the line formed. You took your turn, holding out your plate. The cook scraped a dollop onto your biscuit. It quivered. The biscuit sagged. The man behind you whispered, "Looks like it's trying to escape." You nodded. Historians still debate the causes of butter spoilage on ships. Was it poor salting, weak barrels, the tropical heat? One theory claims the casks were made from pine, which subtly flavoured the butter over time. Unfortunately, that flavour was turpentine. Another theory suggests that the butter wasn't real butter at all, but a rendered mix of animal fats, cheese remnants, and hope. Some logs describe black butter being used to patch sails. Others mention it catching fire spontaneously. One particularly chilling entry refers to butter that bites back. Yours didn't bite, but it groaned a little when you spread it. You took the smallest nibble possible. It felt slick, almost slimy, like someone had bottled the sweat of a candle. There was a sharp tang, then a dull bitterness, then, well, regret, mostly regret. Weller ate his whole portion. He said he hadn't tasted anything in 2 weeks anyway. Then he spent an hour talking to the sky, asking if clouds could melt. Another sailor spread it on both sides of his biscuit and tried to fry it on a shovel. The biscuit caught fire. He called it victory toast, but most of the crew just grimaced, gagged, and wiped their biscuits on their sleeves before chewing through them dry. And yet, no one threw it away. Not fully, because throwing away food on a ship like this is like burning gold. You don't do it. You bury it in the hold. You feed it to the rats. You tell the cook it slipped off the plate. But you don't admit defeat. You kept your share, tuck the rest in a bit of cloth, maybe for later, maybe to bribe someone, maybe to use as a weapon. Later, you caught a whiff of it under your fingernail. You flinched, tried to scrape it off with a biscuit shard. It didn't work. That's the thing about rancid butter. It has staying power. A personality, a grudge. There's a superstition aboard that once you've tasted turned butter, the ocean knows, and she starts to whisper your name in the waves. You don't believe it, of course. Probably. Tonight, as the sun sets, the cook brings out a second cask. "This one smells better," he calls. The crowd hesitates. No one moves. You hear someone mutter, "That's what he said about the cheese." Eventually, someone steps forward. Gibbs, of course. He scoops out a chunk with his bare hand, smears it on a slice of biscuit, and takes a huge bite. He chews, swallows, then stares at the horizon for a full minute. Finally, he says, "Still better than pudding." That's the highest praise anything's gotten in days. You decide to wait until tomorrow. See if anyone dies, just in case. By now, you've accepted that food aboard this ship is more than just nourishment. It's a battlefield, a power struggle, a psychological game of attrition where flavor is irrelevant and texture is a threat. But even among this gauntlet of culinary misery, there are moments, brief, shocking moments, when everything breaks down into pure, biscuit-fueled chaos. Today is one of those days. It begins innocently enough. The cook opens a fresh sack of hardtack. There's a low murmur of anticipation. After all, fresh biscuit just means less horrifying than usual. But when the bag is upended onto the prep table, a swarm of weevils pours out like a biblical plague. They're in the flour, in the corners, in the air. One even lands on the cook's cheek. He slaps it without blinking. Someone gags, someone else claps. You take a step back and seriously consider just gnawing on a chunk of driftwood instead. Then someone says it. We shouldn't have to eat this. It hangs in the air like gunpowder smoke. Technically, it's treason. But also, yes, you shouldn't. And yet, you know you will. Still, something shifts. The tension that's been building for weeks, through the mouldy cheese, the haunted pudding, the hallucinogenic biscuit fuzz, cracks. And then it happens. A biscuit flies hard from one end of the galley to the other. It misses the cook's head by inches and hits a barrel with a clack like a pistol shot. Everyone freezes. You can hear a biscuit crumble in someone's hand. The cook straightens, slowly, turns and says, "Who threw that?" No one answers. Until Weller, dear, dentally challenged. Weller raises a finger and says, "Consider it a review." And then it's war. Another biscuit sails through the air, hitting someone square in the neck. Someone else retaliates with a tin mug full of mashed peas. The galley erupts. You duck as a boot flies past your head, empty, thank God, and slide behind a barrel of salted pork for cover. It's a food fight at sea, and it is glorious. You haven't laughed this hard in weeks, neither has anyone else. The cook is now wielding a ladle like a mace, flinging globs of pudding in wild arcs. Biscuit shrapnel rains down like hail. Someone invents a slingshot out of rope and spoon handles. For 10, maybe 15 minutes, no one's hungry, no one's sad, and no one remembers the mold. It's just chaos, flying starch, screams of mock agony, the sound of old cheese splattering against the mast. Historians still argue whether food fights like this ever actually happened aboard 18th century ships. The official records are quiet, of course they are. No captain wants to admit his crew declared mutiny with biscuit missiles. But personal diaries tell another story. Notes of spirited disagreement over pudding texture or ration protests that escalated with sudden velocity. One log from a French frigate mentions a moment of exuberant airborne bread diplomacy. That sounds about right. Eventually, someone, probably the first mate, blows a whistle, or shouts, or just glares hard enough. The madness slows. The biscuits stop flying. A few last weevils scurry back into hiding. Silence settles again. You peek out from behind your barrel. The deck is littered with mashed peas, soggy bread fragments, and something that may or may not have once been a pear. Weller has a biscuit stuck to his forehead. Gibbs is standing atop a crate, holding a spoon aloft like a conquering hero. No one moves to stop him. The cook sighs, brushes a gob of pudding from his shoulder, and mutters, "Well, guess I'll make soup." No one objects, because after a food fight, after the release, the rage, the absurdity, soup sounds, okay, warm, mercifully unstructured, the kind of thing that doesn't clack against your teeth or whisper in the night. That evening, you sit in a circle on the deck, sipping a watery broth that tastes faintly of pork, peas, and boot. No one complains. The cook serves in silence, occasionally humming. Someone's patched the hole in the sail with old biscuit cloth. Gibbs still hasn't come down from his crate. And you? You stare into your bowl and smile, because sometimes survival looks like soup, and sometimes rebellion is just a biscuit away. You're peeling dried pea paste off your sleeve when it hits you, the smell. It creeps in from the lower hold, slow, sour and layered, like wet wool, boiled cabbage, old boots, and something faintly reminiscent of feet. Not a sharp smell, no. This is a creeping stench, the kind that seeps into your pores before you know it's there and refuses to leave no matter how much salt water you splash on your face. You know this smell, you've lived with it, you've eaten it, you've become it. This, dear friend, is the smell of the ship itself. And in this moment, on this particularly still afternoon, you realize something terrifying. You can no longer tell where the food ends and the ship begins. The biscuit crumbs in your hammock, the greasy bloom around the water barrel, the faint sourness of every blanket, every shirt, every rope. This vessel smells like prolonged eating and not enough regret. Historians love to describe maritime voyages in terms of distances and battles, but rarely do they spend much ink on the atmosphere. The visceral nasal onslaught of living in close proximity with unwashed bodies, rotting provisions, salty moisture, and one shared bathroom, if you're generous with the word bathroom. Even now, as you try to breathe through your mouth, you catch a whiff of everything. Beer that's been spilled and reborn as fungus on the floorboards, socks stewed in seawater and vinegar, biscuit mold scraped off the ceiling, and that one guy, no one's sure who smells faintly of garlic and despair. But the worst is the food locker. It's below deck, wedged beside the ballast and behind the barrels of brined pork. It's not locked, not because of trust, but because no one wants to go in there voluntarily. You draw the short straw today. The moment you crack the door, the air changes, heavy, wet. It clings to your face like a used towel. You blink. Something moves. You hope it was a shadow. The stench is unbearable, the kind that hits you in waves. You take one step in and your boot squishes. Why is it squishing? Don't ask. Don't ever ask. You reach for a biscuit sack. It crumbles in your hand, not the biscuits, the sack. You lift a piece and it hisses as it bends. That's not right. You put it down. Something drips. You don't look up. This isn't just rot, it's generational rot. This is food that's been losing arguments with time since before you were born. A slice of pork in the corner appears to have developed scales. There's a sack of flour that smells like boiled eggs and ambition. You swear something in a barrel snored. And still somehow you gather your rations. You wrap the biscuit in cloth, gently, like it might explode. You grab a slab of beef that feels slimy even through the canvas. You breathe through your mouth and hum a shanty to distract yourself. Then you leave and you run. Back on deck, fresh air fills your lungs, if you can call air that tastes like rope and smoke. Fresh. You look around and realize no one else looks bothered. This is normal, this is routine. The ship is alive, not just with people and wind and sea, but with smells. A constantly simmering stew of human and food and salt and time. It seeps into the biscuits, into your hair, into your thoughts. One sailor once described it as a smell you carry with you forever. He claimed, years after disembarking, that he'd catch a whiff of weevil flour and brined socks while walking through a bakery. He never ate scones again. Another said he couldn't sleep on land for months because the silence lacked the scent of biscuit mold and fermented beef. So he baked his own hardtack, left it out for weeks, then crumbled it under his pillow. He called it memory dust. And you don't even notice it anymore. That's the terrifying part. Because once the smell becomes normal, once you stop flinching, once you stop gagging at the greenish butter or the pudding that smells like ash and boot leather, that's when you realize you're not just on the ship. You are the ship. Tonight the ship rocks harder than usual. Long, slow groans from the timbers, like an old man trying to stretch after a nap that lasted a decade. Rain taps at the deck above. The lantern swings, casting wide, lazy arcs of gold light. Shadows flicker like they've got secrets to keep. You're in your hammock, blanket pulled to your chin, and something drops onto your chest. You flinch. It's a maggot, small, pale, wiggly. It rolls off, disappears into the folds of your shirt, and you decide, firmly, not to go looking for it. Some things are better left unsquished. You sigh. Not even the officers are spared anymore. You heard the rumor earlier today, whispers below deck, nervous laughs, but it's been confirmed now. Someone found maggots in the captain's cabin. There's something almost comforting about it. Because for weeks, months even, it's felt like the rot and ruin of shipboard cuisine was somehow reserved for the crew. The biscuit mould, the moving beef, the talking pudding, it all seemed to trickle downward. But now the rot has gone upstairs. You imagine the scene, the captain, pristine in his starch-stiff coat, pulling back a napkin to reveal his private meal, likely a better biscuit, a finer cut of beef, and, seeing it writhe, the sheer horror, the betrayal, the complete and utter loss of illusion. One sailor said the maggots were discovered in the butter dish. Another claimed they were inside the bread roll, hollowing it out like a cradle. Someone else said they were found in the inkwell. That last one was probably a joke. Probably. Historians still argue whether officers genuinely received better rations or if that was just wishful resentment from the lower decks. Some diaries suggest captains had separate stores. Others imply they simply got first pick, meaning the least fuzzy biscuit, the least translucent meat, and the beer that foamed when shaken. But in the end, it all came from the same barrels, the same biscuit sacks, the same hopelessly damp hold full of fermented disappointment and weevil ambition. You chew thoughtfully on a biscuit corner, softened in warm grog. It's slightly sweet today. Which worries you. Sugar isn't supposed to be part of the biscuit profile, but you keep chewing, because if the captain has maggots in his food, you no longer have to pretend things will get better from the top down. The great equalizer has arrived. The playing field is level, and that level is infested. Gibbs thinks it's divine punishment. He says the sea gods are angry, possibly at the captain's poor taste in boots. Weller says it's just gravity. Of course the rot moves upward eventually. It's a system, like digestion, but in reverse. The cook doesn't even try to deny it. He shrugged when someone asked. They wanted butter, he said. They got friends. You saw him later that night, carving the maggoty roll into a shape that vaguely resembled a small swan. He placed it on a plate and said, "Fine dining." One sailor brought it to the captain's door. He was not amused, but he didn't throw it out either. You suspect he's come to the same realization you have. You eat what you're given, or you eat nothing at all. That's the law of the sea. Even the officers can't argue with that. The next day, the captain appears on deck, paler than usual. He walks stiffly. He squints into the sun as if it's mocking him. And he carries a mug of grog, same as everyone else. Someone whispers, "I heard he asked for double biscuit today." Someone else adds, "To feed the maggots." The crew laughs, quietly, carefully. But it feels good. Later that night, you lie in your hammock, watching the lanterns swing and listening to the slow drip of water from the ceiling. You feel crumbs in your blanket, biscuit flakes in your collar, a soft tickle at your ankle that you choose not to investigate. You close your eyes. You dream of the captain, sitting at a silver-plated table, lifting a forkful of writhing biscuit to his mouth. He smiles, chews, and says, "Delicate, slightly citrus, aged well." You wake up, laughing, because somehow this is normal now, and somehow it's not even the worst thing you've eaten. You're on morning rope duty, fingers raw and shoulders aching, when the new recruit screams. Everyone freezes, a rope slips. A pulley creaks, then you hear it. He dropped the biscuit on his foot. His foot. You wince before you even look, because you know what's coming next. You see the recruit, a kid barely old enough to grow stubble, hopping on one leg, clutching his boot, eyes wide with shock. A biscuit lies nearby, completely intact. Smug even, the toe of his boot is dented. One sailor leans down, picks up the biscuit, and whistles. "Didn't crack, strong batch." Welcome, friends, to the tale of the legendary biscuit brick, the most infamous ration on this ship, and possibly in maritime history. A single piece of food so dense, so unyielding, it crossed the threshold from edible to dangerous projectile. You take the biscuit from your crewmate and test it in your hand. Our hand. It's warm from the sun, rough to the touch, and utterly unyielding. You rap it against the mast. The mast vibrates. You tap it against your knuckles just once and immediately regret it. It's hard, hard in a way that defies nature, hard like it wants to hurt you. And it has. Weller, who's been aboard since time forgot, swears he once saw a man break a tooth just looking at it too hard. Gibbs claims a biscuit this dense was once fired from a cannon as a warning shot. Others call it the Widowmaker, or the deck spike, or that dented loaf. Historians still argue whether such biscuits were a result of overbaking, overdrying, or simply being left out in the sun long enough to fossilize. Some say certain bakers prided themselves on producing ship's bread that could survive a decade at sea. Others suggest the Navy ordered them this way on purpose to test sailors' resolve, or maybe just their molars. You believe it was an accident, a cursed accident, the kind that can't be replicated. You remember the day the original biscuit brick appeared? It was passed around like a relic. Men tapped it against the deck, the rail, even their own skulls. One lad tried to carve his initials into it and broke the tip off his knife. Another used it to hammer a loose nail. Successfully. You're pretty sure it once doubled as an anchor weight during an emergency. But this morning's incident proves what you already knew. The biscuit brick hurts. The recruit sits down, unlacing his boot with a trembling hand. His toe is swelling. Purple. He mutters something about filing a complaint with the Admiralty. Weller hands him a damp cloth and says gently, "Son, the biscuit doesn't care. You consider throwing it overboard, but then again it might sink the ship. So instead, you place it gently on a nearby crate. Someone's carved a tiny crown into its surface. Another sailor adds tally marks for every incident it's caused. By midday, it has 4. It's becoming a monument, a warning, a mascot. That evening, you sit near it, sipping grog, staring into the middle distance as the sky burns gold and the sails flap like distant drums. The brick sits beside you, silent, powerful, slightly warm. You wonder if it dreams. One sailor drapes a blanket over it and says, "We should name it." Another suggests Old Crunchy. Someone else proposes Saint Crust. The crew votes. The biscuit brick is officially christened Captain Hardtack. You salute it. Somewhere deep below in the bowels of the galley, the cook finds another sack. He opens it, pulls out a biscuit, taps it, frowns, then smiles. The next morning, 2 more recruits have blackened toes. Captain Hardtack's reign has begun. And you just keep chewing, slowly, carefully, never too fast. Never with your front teeth. You tap your ration against your bowl first, just to be sure it doesn't ring, because you never know. One day that biscuit might hit back. You wake to shouting on the main deck. Sharp, urgent voices with a note of panic. You haven't heard since that one time a drunken sailor mistook the ship's cat for a French spy. You pull yourself out of the hammock, boots half on, and stagger up the ladder into blinding sunlight. At the center of it all, a barrel, open, still sloshing. The cook stands beside it, pale and blinking. "It's gone green," he says. "Bright green." You peer into the barrel and catch a whiff that nearly knocks you backward. It's sharp, bitter, almost citrusy, but wrong. Like if a lime tried to pickle itself and gave up halfway. Someone near you murmurs, "Limes again." Of course, the limes, the lies, the naval politics. You see, scurvy has been hovering over this voyage like a cloud full of bleeding gums and loose teeth. Everyone knows the cure, or they think they do. It's citrus, right? Lemons, oranges, maybe limes. Someone once suggested pine needles. You didn't ask. But here's the problem. Not all citrus is created equal. Back in port, the Navy loaded up barrels of lime juice, supposedly for your health, supposedly to keep your teeth in place and your legs from turning into bruised stilts. But this glowing green swamp water, this isn't citrus. This is revenge. Historians still argue whether British naval policy actually caused more scurvy with their lime switch. Lemons are rich in vitamin C. Limes less so, especially when boiled, stored in copper vessels, and then left to ferment for weeks. Some ships reported scurvy outbreaks even after taking their rations. And now, with this barrel, you understand why. The green sludge swirls like it's thinking about forming sentience. Weller dips a spoon in, sniffs it, and immediately throws the spoon overboard. That's not juice, he says. That's something else. You believe him. One sailor starts insisting the juice was poisoned, part of a grand conspiracy to thin the ranks and save rations. Another claims it's all a misunderstanding, and that the cook accidentally added beef brine to the citrus barrel. The cook throws his apron on the deck and mutters, "I'm a chef, not an alchemist." You personally suspect it's just the usual mix of ignorance, poor storage, and wishful thinking that plagues every ship afloat. Still, the damage is done. No one will touch the lime juice now, which means the only defense you had against scurvy, the illusion of protection, is gone. You check your gums with your tongue, still tender. You wince. Someone proposes fermenting the juice further to turn it into alcohol. If we can't fight scurvy, he says, maybe we can forget it. The idea gains traction. Gibbs offers to supervise the process. He already has a name picked out, Lime Lightning. Later that day, the first mate calls a meeting, an official one. He holds a half-empty mug of the green liquid and tries to sound authoritative. "We are investigating the contents of this barrel," he says. "But for now, no one is to drink from it." A pause. "Also, no one is to throw it overboard." Everyone groans. Someone shouts, "Why not?" "Because we've got 6 more barrels just like it." You sleep badly that night, not just from hunger, or cold, or the familiar biscuit crumbs jabbing your ribs like angry gravel, but because now the idea of the juice lingers, a false hope turned sour. You dreamed of citrus, of fresh-cut limes, of sailors laughing on sunny decks, skin clear, eyes bright. Instead, you woke to neon swamp juice and the slow crawl of soft gums. The next morning, the cook serves a biscuit dipped in the lime barrel's runoff. To soften it, he says, you chew once. It burns, and for a moment your vision flickers. You see the truth. The Navy didn't give you citrus to save you. They gave it to say they tried. The sky is low and grey, a heavy blanket that presses on your thoughts. The sails hang damp and sullen. Rain drizzles sideways, then straight down, then sideways again, just to make sure you're paying attention. You're cold, you're damp, and you're hungry, but not just any hunger. You're waiting for meal delivery, because today something different is happening. The cook is sending meals up from the galley rather than having everyone line up. He says it's because of the rain. You suspect it's because someone threw a weevil at him yesterday. He didn't take it well. You and the rest of your mess group huddle under a tarp, watching the stairs. Weller's got a fork tucked behind one ear. Gibbs is already chewing, even though there's nothing in his mouth. Muscle memory, he explains. Finally, the cook's assistant emerges, Arlo, age probably 15, height roughly that of a flour sack. He's holding a tray. It's wobbling. He looks terrified. He steps forward and the ship rolls. You know what's coming. The tray goes airborne. One bowl hits a bulkhead with a splash. Another skids across the deck and vanishes into the sea. The last 2, they land with a splat. One upside down, the other upright, but already filling with rainwater. The crew erupts. Some shout, some sigh. One sailor falls to his knees and wails, "Why, Lord, why soup in the wind?" You just sit very still, watching the puddle of stew slowly reach your boots. And thus begins one of the oldest, most dramatic traditions of shipboard life, the food fight that wasn't supposed to be a food fight. Historians often overlook this chaotic ritual. Diaries mention incidents during ration delivery or supper gone sideways, but you know what it really is: chance for the entire crew to let out weeks, months of pent-up frustration by using food not as fuel, but as ammunition. It always starts the same way. One bowl drops, one biscuit bounces, someone mutters, "That was my only dinner," and then a spoon flies. Today, it's a spoonful of cold peas. It hits Gibbs squarely in the back of the head. He turns slowly. A single green smear drips down his neck. Everyone freezes, and then he smiles. Oh, it's on. The next thing you know, someone's flinging a biscuit like a discus. Another sailor hurls a ladle full of pork jelly with deadly accuracy. You catch a splash of grog to the shoulder, lukewarm and sticky. You retaliate with half a boiled onion. Spoons become catapults. Bowls become shields. One crewmate somehow turns a fishbone into a dart. The tarp you were sitting under? Gone. Replaced with flying pudding and rain-sogged chunks of bread. It's glorious, it's messy, it's inevitable. And somewhere in the midst of it, Arlo, the poor delivery boy, is still standing at the top of the stairs, holding an empty tray and quietly crying. Even the cook gets involved this time. He emerges with a pot of stew and flings it, screaming, "For the honour of the galley!" The contents hit the deck and slide under the gunwale. Someone tries to eat it off the wood. No one judges. Eventually, the first mate appears, soaking wet and unimpressed. He raises a hand. "Enough," he says. A few last peas fly. One final biscuit rolls to a dainty,
else to a stop near his boot. He doesn't move. Instead, he picks it up, brushes it off, and bites into it. It cracks like thunder. He chews, he swallows, then he says, "Next time, serve it in the bowl." That's the signal. It's over. The crew disperses slowly. The cook disappears into the galley. Gibbs wipes his face with a rag that might once have been a sock. Weller finds half a biscuit in his hat and eats it without blinking. You look around. The deck is a battlefield of peas, crumbs, shredded meat, and pride. It smells like loss, with a hint of onion. Your stomach grumbles, but you don't even mind. You're weirdly satisfied. Because sometimes even a ruined meal is better than no meal at all. And sometimes flinging food across a storm-tossed ship is the only way to feel alive. That night, the cook quietly delivers dry biscuit and cold cheese to everyone's hammock. No pudding, no stew, no surprises. You chew in the dark, slowly smiling to yourself. Because the biscuit hit the first mate, and no one got punished. The sun rises reluctantly, dragging itself over the horizon like it knows what's waiting on this ship and wants no part of it. The sky is yellow-grey, the sea is calm, and below deck a barrel is being opened. You hear the sound before you smell it. Wooden lid creaking, something thick sloshing, the cook's muffled curse. Then it hits you, the stench. It's sour, meaty and metallic, like an old boot left to marinate in brine. Sadness and something vaguely medical. You've smelled bad before, but this is uncertain. You make your way down into the galley, holding your nose more from habit than hope. The cook turns to face you. He's holding a long fork. On the end of it is a slab of meat, long, smooth, curled slightly, purple-grey. "Pickled tongue," he says. You blink. "From what?" He shrugs. The label says ox. Could be a lie.
Could be a dare. You stare at the thing. It stares back, not literally but spiritually. Welcome to the unsettling world of pickled mystery meat, a staple of long voyages and short trust. This barrel's been on board since the last port, maybe 2 ports ago, no one's quite sure. It surfaced today because the biscuit sack finally gave up and crumbled into a pile of grey sand and larvae. So now it's tongue time. Pickled meat is a sailor's lottery. Sometimes you get something chewy but edible. Sometimes you get a biology lesson. Once you got something with hair. That was a low point. You remember hearing that pickled tongue was a delicacy in some places, rich in protein, packed in vinegar, salt and spices. Tasty, tender, nutrient-dense. Oh, this is not that. This is a tongue that has been soaking in its own existential dread. It jiggles, it glistens, it thuds when dropped onto the cutting board. The cook slices it. You see the layers: pale muscle, dark veins, pockets of gelatin. It looks like something halfway between food and artifact. You take a piece. It's cold, slightly rubbery, smells like pickled boots and betrayal. You chew. It's not the worst thing you've eaten, but it's the most confusing. The flavor is bland, almost sour. The texture is like trying to eat a balloon that's been soaked in brine. You keep going because it's either this or chewing the inside of your own cheek for dinner. Historians still argue over what went into preserved meat barrels on these long voyages. Tongue was common, so were cheeks, flanks, rumps, sometimes ears, sometimes tails, sometimes a little bit of everything. One journal entry from an old merchant ship just says, meat assorted, no further details. There are tales, quiet ones, of barrels marked with a red X. No one asks why. No one opens them until it's the last option. One time, a cook pulled something out of a barrel and held it up to the light.
"That's not from a cow," he whispered. "He cooked it anyway." You glance back at your plate. The meat doesn't look any smaller. You're sure you've been chewing for minutes. A sailor next to you flips his piece over and frowns. "This side looks angrier," he says. Gibbs, unfazed, picks up his tongue with his fingers and bites directly into it like it's an apple. "Bit salty," he says, "but better than the fish pudding." You're too tired to argue, and then someone finds a second tongue in the barrel. Now that's not suspicious in itself. Oxen do, in fact, have one tongue each. But the size of this one? It's longer, thicker, too smooth. No one says it. No one wants to ask. But someone whispers, "Whale?" And someone else whispers back, "Not whale." You scrape your plate and finish the last few bites, swallowing quickly, willing your stomach to stay calm. It rumbles anyway. Your body isn't fooled. That night, the captain appears at supper. He's holding a tin plate.
On it, a slice of tongue. He eats it slowly, deliberately. His eyes never leave the cook's. No one speaks. It's a gesture, a message. We are all in this together. Or perhaps, don't ask, just chew. Later, in your hammock, you lie awake, wondering where that second tongue came from. You hope there's not a third. You wake up thirsty. Not regular thirsty. Not, "I could use a sip of grog" thirsty. No, this is deep, bone dry, lips stuck together, tongue feels like a burlap sack thirst. You sit up in your hammock, blinking at the dark ceiling, and grope for your mug. It's empty. You knew it would be, but you check anyway. You'd drink your own thoughts at this point if they were slightly damp. That's when you hear it. A tapping sound, soft, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. You follow it through the dim hallway, past hammocks and crates and a barrel that's either leaking or crying. And there he is, Benny, the quiet one, always scribbling in a little journal. Nobody's quite sure what he does, but no one tells him to stop either. He's sitting on a crate, eyes half closed, gently tapping a biscuit on the wooden rail. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. "What are you doing?" you whisper. He doesn't look up. "Forecasting," he mutters. You blink. "Come again?" He raises the biscuit very slowly and holds it up to the lantern light. He taps again. "It's going to rain tomorrow," he says. And that's how you learn about the biscuit whisperer. You sit beside him and watch. He's got a stack of hardtack lined up like stones at Stonehenge, each one marked with a bit of chalk. Some have tiny notches carved into them. One is tied to a string like a pendulum. He taps. He listens. He smells. "Barometric shifts," he explains, completely serious. "Changes the moisture levels in the biscuit, makes them flex differently." You want to laugh. You do laugh, but then Gibbs walks by, nods, and says, "Told you it'd drizzle. Benny called it." Turns out he's got a bit of a reputation. Last week he predicted a squall 2 hours before the lookout saw the first clouds. Week before that, he told the cook not to open a certain beef barrel because the biscuits were ringing funny. The barrel exploded, and yesterday? He said, eat the flattest one you'll see. You did. It had no bugs, no mold, no unpleasant crunch, just dryness, which at this point is like finding a pearl. Historians might scoff at such behavior, of course. There's no official record of weather divination through baked goods, no scientific method, no peer-reviewed studies. But out here on a rotting wooden ship in the middle of an endless, indifferent sea, A man who can smell a biscuit and tell you if the wind's changing becomes valuable. He claims biscuits hum when there's a storm coming, that the weevil activity slows when the air pressure drops. That mold forms in patterns that reflect ocean currents. One biscuit, shaped vaguely like a map of the Caribbean, he keeps wrapped in cloth and tied to his belt. Navigation biscuit, he says, not for eating. You wouldn't eat it, even if it was the last ration left. It's got a crack, shaped like a serpent, and smells like it's trying to remember milk. Today, he offers you a biscuit. Try this one, he says. It's going to be a calm night. You accept. It's lighter than most, less dense, almost forgiving. You tap it. It makes a dull, friendly thud. You eat it, and somehow it tastes better. Still dry, still bland, but not offensive, not risky, just tolerable. You sit back and chew slowly, watching Benny tap out a rhythm on the next biscuit like he's playing an instrument no one else hears. The crew doesn't question him anymore. The captain once asked for a reading. Benny sniffed a biscuit, flicked it with his fingernail and said, "Headwinds by morning." He was right. Some sailors leave their ration with him overnight. Let it absorb the right air, they say. Benny blesses it. One swears his biscuit sprouted a soft patch of green mold shaped like a feather, the sign of favour. You're not sure what you believe, but when your rations are full of crunching bugs, sour butter, and pickled what-ifs, and some quiet soul in the corner seems to know which piece of baked stone won't try to kill you, you listen. So tonight, you drift off with a soft biscuit in your stomach, a cup of thin grog beside you, and the sound of distant tapping echoing through the hold. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe it means fair winds tomorrow. You wake to silence, real, eerie silence. No wind through the rigging, no waves slapping the hull, not even Gibbs snoring. Just the creak of the timbers and the slow, steady drip from the leak above your hammock. And in that silence, you feel it. A weight. Not physical, not hunger. It's dread. You can't explain it. No one can, but everyone feels it. The air is thick. Still, like something is watching. You dress slowly, avoiding eye contact with the mouldy biscuit tucked in your coat pocket, and climb to the deck. The sky is clear, too clear. The sea, flat and glassy. The cook is stirring something, but he's not singing. Gibbs isn't making jokes. Even Weller, usually whistling through his cracked teeth, is muttering a prayer under his breath. It's a superstition day. You see, the ship doesn't just carry biscuits and beef and bad decisions. It carries beliefs, dozens of them, whispered codes, taboo shapes, old sailor rules that no one questions. And on days like this, certain biscuits are feared. The superstitions vary. Some say if your biscuit cracks into 3 pieces when you bite it, a storm will follow. If it crumbles into powder, someone on board is lying. If a weevil walks out and stops, just freezes mid-biscuit, you're in real trouble. But the most feared biscuit of all, the black ring. You don't even want to say it aloud. Most sailors just call it the circle. A hardtack that's formed with a faint, dark ring around the centre. Not burnt, not mould, just darker. The story goes that it only appears when something is about to happen. Bad omens, bad deaths, whole ships lost to storms days after someone bit into one. One logbook described the black ring as a mouthful of death. Today a sailor named Finch finds one. He doesn't know at first. He's halfway through chewing when Weller sees it. Stop chewing. The voice is sharp, quiet, like he's trying not to wake something. Finch freezes, biscuit in mouth. Did it have a ring? Someone whispers. Finch, confused, nods. The entire crew backs away. The cook drops his ladle. It hits the deck with a metallic clang that echoes like a bell. And then, as if summoned, the wind picks up. Fast, hard. Within minutes, the sails are groaning, the ship lurches, and rain lashes sideways out of a sky that had been empty 5 breaths ago. Historians dismiss sailor superstitions as folk nonsense, products of isolation, fear, and too many fermented onions. But when a biscuit seems to summon a storm and your boots are sliding across the deck, and someone swears the rigging's humming in a voice that sounds like your mother, you start to believe. The storm rages for hours. Buckets of cold water slap the deck. One sail tears loose. 2 barrels go overboard. Finch loses his biscuit and his boots. You lose your appetite, your dry socks, and almost your balance. When it ends hard. No wind, just silence again. But this time it's clean, empty. The air is scrubbed. You find the soggy remains of the biscuit, wedged in a coil of rope. The ring is gone now, dissolved. You toss it overboard, whispering something you hope sounds respectful. That night, the galley is silent. Everyone eats carefully, one bite at a time, eyes scanning for rings, cracks, signs. No one wants to tempt the biscuit gods again. Benny, the biscuit whisperer, says nothing. He just tucks a new one into his pocket and hums softly. A tune no one recognizes but everyone respects. You lie in your hammock, still damp, still shivering, and stare at the beams above. There's a biscuit on the ledge, watching. You pull your blanket over your head. You've gone nose blind to most things on this ship. Fish rot, biscuit dust, the sour funk of unwashed socks simmering in sea air. But today? Today hits different, because today is ration rotation day. Every so often, the quartermaster decides it's time to dig into the deepest recesses of the ship's food stores. It's a ritual, part inventory, part archaeology, and part biohazard response. He emerges from the dark like a man who's stared into the abyss. And the abyss definitely had mold. He's holding a sack. The color is off. The smell is offensive. The label? Faded beyond hope. But someone scrawled a date in the corner, and you do a quick calculation. This biscuit batch is 7 years old, which means it predates the ship's last 3 captains, at least 2 repairs to the stern, and, according to legend, a mutiny involving salted cabbage and poor lighting. You gather with the others around the barrel as the cook slices open the sack. The room goes quiet inside. Biscuits, rounder than usual, lighter in shade, and coated in a soft greenish fuzz that looks like someone sprinkled moss over them as a garnish. Gibbs leans in. Mint-flavored? You elbow him. That's not mint. Historians still debate how long hardtack can last. Some argue it was effectively immortal, baked to petrification, sealed in dry conditions and immune to decay. Others claim the moment it touches shipboard humidity, it begins its slow march toward edible shame. Clearly this sack took the latter route. The cook, ever the optimist, scrapes off the fuzz with a spoon and offers slices to the crew. Slices of biscuit. That's how soft it's gotten. You try a piece. Immediately regret it. It tastes like regret and basement, not rancid, just musty. Like it used to be food, but now identifies as upholstery. It sticks to your teeth and leaves behind a flavor note you can only describe as centuries. Weller claims it's fine, says he's eaten worse. He chews like a man working through old memories. The recruit who bit into it first starts twitching. He insists he's fine. He is not. The next day, someone reports seeing him talking to the biscuits in storage, calling them captain's cookies. He's gently stacking them by color. No one intervenes. Soon, a quiet panic spreads through the crew. Not about sickness, not about spoilage, but about what else is down there. Because if this batch is from 7 years ago, what's sitting behind that? 10 years? 15? There's a rumor passed down between hammocks that one crate contains biscuits from the last war. The cook once swore he saw one stamped with a crown that predates this monarch. There's talk of a biscuit that's so old it's no longer considered food, but rather artifact. The crew calls it the relic. Supposedly it was baked in 1710 and still rattles when shaken. No one knows what's inside. No one wants to. Someone suggests taking the oldest biscuit, wrapping it in canvas and launching it overboard as an offering. Another suggests eating it during the ceremony to gain the knowledge of the saltborn. You suggest we stop eating anything that smells like antique parchment. The next morning, the quartermaster appears again. New sack, no label, no visible fuzz. He holds up a biscuit and bites into it. It snaps loudly. Everyone cheers, because if it snaps, it can't be that soft. That means it's back to the good kind of awful, the dry, dense, tooth-breaking kind. You take your own and test it. It chips a bit off your molar. Perfect. Later that day, you find the recruit curled up near the anchor, whispering biscuit facts to a passing seagull. You pat his shoulder. He doesn't respond, but he offers you a piece of green biscuit wrapped in cloth. You decline politely, because you've learned something important. Old food isn't just old, it remembers. And sometimes you'd rather not share in those memories. The day starts with a crunch, not from a biscuit, but from your back, which apparently no longer tolerates hammocks, salt air, or living. You groan, stretch, and sit up, just in time to see something truly rare. Breakfast innovation. The cook has snapped, broken, enlightened. No one's sure. But he's serving something new, something unrecognizable. You queue up with the others, squinting into the bowl he hands you. It's mush, grey-brown, slightly gelatinous, smells faintly of fish. Looks like someone melted a biscuit into soup and forgot to stir. He grins. Biscuit porridge, he says. You blink. Come again? Biscuit porridge, he repeats proudly. Ground the stale ones, boiled them with water, added a touch of salt, bit of beef drippings. Look, no chewing required. You look down at the bowl again. It jiggles. You're not convinced, but you try it. Because, as always, the alternative is hunger. Or chewing through the deck planks, you dip your spoon and bring a bite to your lips. Warm, soft, savoury. Not terrible. You blink again, taste it a second time. Still not terrible. Weller beside you is crying. Actual tears. It's soft, he whispers. I haven't had soft food since New Providence. Even Gibbs sets down his cup and nods. No bugs, he says, almost creamy. Soon a line forms. Sailors with tired eyes and bruised gums shuffle up for a bowl of something that, while resembling an accident, tastes like mercy. The cook, emboldened, starts talking about adding herbs tomorrow. The crew doesn't know how to react to this. Historians still argue whether biscuit mash or hardtack stew was ever truly common aboard ships. It wasn't recorded in ledgers much because it wasn't official, but it shows up in letters, journals, muttered confessions from cooks long after landfall. A desperate improvisation, a kindness made from cruelty. Today it feels like hope. You sit in a quiet corner with your bowl, cradling it like treasure. The heat seeps into your palms. The taste, mild, salty, comforting, sits in your belly like a warm stone. No crunch, no mold, no weevils, no sudden texture betrayal. And that's when someone says it. Imagine if we had spices. The word hangs in the air. Spices. You remember stories. Cinnamon, nutmeg, pepper, vanilla. Foreign luxuries sailed across oceans in little sacks worth their weight in gold. Most of the time, your food's only seasoning is suspicion. But now, someone's imagining actual flavor. Someone else says, imagine sugar. A third whispers, cheese. And for a brief, flickering moment, the ship is silent, not with dread or cold or exhaustion, but with dreaming. Of stew that tastes like home, of pies even, of bread you don't have to soak in grog for an hour before attempting to swallow. Benny taps a soft biscuit against the railing, listening. The biscuits want cinnamon, he mutters. No one argues. That night, the cook tries adding dried apple bits to the mush. They're shriveled and taste more like wood than fruit, but still. He tried. The porridge is a little sweeter, a little friendlier. And in a ship held together by salt, splinters and prayer, that matters. You lie in your hammock, belly warm, mouth not bleeding, heart a little lighter. The sea is calm, the biscuits are soft, the cook is humming again. And for once, sleep comes quickly, because sometimes salvation is a bowl of mush in the dark. You awaken to a chorus of seagulls, loud, insistent, rude. This can only mean one thing. Land, distant, barely visible, but real. The first smudge of green-grey since you left port, however many weeks ago. It's enough to send the crew scrambling like excited children and suspicious rodents. You climb to the deck, squinting into the morning haze. There it is, a rocky coastline with trees that don't sway in unison like the ship's masts, and ground that doesn't move with the waves. It feels almost mythical. Fresh food, someone says reverently.
Real bread. Fruit, another whispers. Cheese, says a third, eyes wet. And then Weller, voice grave, adds, no biscuits. A hush falls over the group because, yes, land means new supplies, fresh produce, things with flavour and moisture. It also means the end of this long voyage, or at least the beginning of a merciful pause. But most importantly, it means a temporary goodbye to the ship's ever-present companion, the biscuit. Not all sailors are celebrating, though. Some stare at their last biscuit like it's a childhood toy about to be thrown away. Even Gibbs holds his up to the sky, studying the familiar cracks, the mould-shaped map of Wales, the small hole left by a polite weevil. This one saw me through 3 storms, he says, and that whole week when the beef was jelly. There's talk, half serious, of saving a biscuit each, keeping it as a memento. Some string theirs into necklaces, others carve names into them.
One fellow's trying to trade his biscuit for a kiss from a barmaid when they land. The odds are not in his favour. The cook, meanwhile, is in mourning. He stands over the galley fire, staring into a pot of mush, knowing full well he won't be needed once everyone smells fresh bread from the harbour bakeries. His reign, equal parts creative and cruel, is coming to an end. He ladles out one last serving of biscuit porridge, now seasoned, with a hint of nutmeg. No one asks where he got it. No one wants to know. Historians sometimes write of these final days before landfall with poetic nostalgia, the hope, the tension, the restlessness. But they rarely capture the strange emotional pull between loathing and loyalty that sailors develop toward their shipboard rations, toward the biscuit. Yes, they were hard. Yes, they were stale. Yes, some moved on their own. But they were consistent, unchanging. In a world of storms, isolation, and leaking boots, the biscuit was always there. Was a bad friend, perhaps, but one who showed up every day. You take your own final biscuit from your jacket pocket. It's round, sun-bleached and chipped at the edge. You've gnawed it down like a hamster over the weeks, but it's still got a good heft. You turn it over in your palm. It's marked, tiny lines from your fingernails, a notch from that night in the storm, a faint smudge of brined pork from who knows when. You could toss it overboard, give it a burial at sea. You could keep it forever, or you could eat it. You look out at the land. It's closer now. The ship creaks forward. You smell trees. You think you hear dogs barking on shore. You raise the biscuit to your mouth. One last bite. It cracks hard and defiant, as if saying, I'll outlast you yet. You chew, you wince, you swallow. It's terrible, but it's yours. And for a fleeting second you wonder, when you're back on land eating bread that's soft and warm and doesn't fight you back, will you miss this? The crunch, the salt, the survival? You think, maybe, just a little. The harbour groans beneath the weight of boots returning to land. Ropes creak, sails slap, and the ship, like you, seems unsure what to do now that the voyage is over. After months of rocking, swaying, and chewing food that could double as masonry, stillness feels foreign. You step off the gangplank, one foot on wood, the other on stone. Earth. Actual not going anywhere ground. It doesn't pitch. It doesn't sway. It doesn't demand balance. It just is. You wobble like a drunk baby bird. The dock workers smirk. Locals watch you all stumble forward in crooked lines, sunburnt and salt-bitten, half-starved and biscuit-weary. Someone throws an apple at you. You catch it. Your fingers dent the skin, and juice runs down your palm. You stare. Because for the first time in forever you're holding something that grew, that lived recently, that doesn't need to be soaked, scraped, boiled, or guessed at. You bite. Your teeth sink in without protest. It's crisp, sweet, tart. You chew without fear, and you weep. Nearby, the cook unpacks crates. He holds a fresh loaf of bread in both hands like it's a newborn. He sniffs it, nods once, then mutters, "Won't last 2 days?" and sets it aside like it's fragile. The crew disperses into the town. Some seek food, others seek women, or drink, or just the absence of the ocean. You find yourself in a small shop that smells of yeast and cinnamon. There's bread, real bread, soft rolls, pillowy loaves, and a cake that dares you to remember the word sponge. You buy nothing. You just stand there, breathing in the aroma of things that aren't beige or brittle. Then quietly, you pull a biscuit from your coat pocket. Your last one. Your companion. You set it gently on the counter. The baker squints. What's that? You smile. A story. He nods, unsure, and takes it. Places it on a shelf beside the scones. It looks wildly out of place. Ancient, proud, a hardened veteran among pastries. You step outside and squint into the sun. It's warm. The air smells of flowers, not fish. The sky is broad and silent. You feel lighter, softer, like something inside you has thawed. Back at the dock, Benny leans on a crate, his journal open, writing quietly. You pass him, and he looks up. Storm tonight, he says. You glance at the clear blue sky. He shrugs. The biscuit said so. You smile, and you believe him. Because some truths aren't in books or charts. Some are in crumbs, some are in cracks. Some are baked into every bite you cursed, chewed, and somehow survived. And as you walk into town, belly full of apple, mind full of salt wind and soggy boots, you realize you'll never look at bread the same way again, because you once feared a biscuit more than a storm. And now you've come through both. The sea is behind you now, a gentle hush on the edge of memory. The sails are furled, the deck's quiet, the biscuits long gone, crumbs of history dissolving in soft twilight. Your feet are steady. The land no longer tilts beneath you. Your breath comes slow, easy, longer clouded by salt or cold or hunger. The aches in your back have softened into stories. The taste of brine and biscuit, long faded, leaves behind only whispers. You remember the warmth of the galley, the laughter of half-starved men joking through cracked teeth, the soft scrape of spoon on bowl, the steady rhythm of boots on wet planks. You remember storms survived, biscuits hurled, mysteries pickled, and moments of stillness where sleep found you, even when peace didn't. You made it through. Not just the voyage, but the waiting, the endless meals without flavour, the days of chewing and hoping and chewing again. You endured food that fought back and lived to savour fruit that didn't. Let that comfort you now. Let that story settle into your breath like low tide under moonlight, because you've earned rest. Let your shoulders ease. Let your eyes drift closed. Let the memories of rough hands and rougher rations fade into softness. You're warm. You're full. You're safe. And out there, somewhere, maybe one lonely biscuit still floats, unbitten, waiting. But not for you, not anymore. Sweet dreams.